Buenas and half a day, the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research and Planning is calling this virtual public hearing to order. The time is now 9:02 a.m. Tuesday, January 18th, 2022. Notice of this morning's virtual hearing is provided via email to senators, stakeholders, and local media on January 10th, 2022 for the 5-day notice and January 16th, 2022 for the 48-hour notice, thus meeting the requirements of open government law. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that have joined me here today. Senator, I'm going to go by the screen, Senator Jim Moylan, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Telena Nelson, Senator Amanda Shelton, Senator Telo Taitague, Senator Tony Atta, and Speaker Therese Terlaje. The purpose of this virtual public hearing is to receive testimony on the following agenda: to hear testimony regarding the executive appointment of Mr. Stephen P. Carbullido to serve as a member of the Guam Environmental Protection Agency Board of Directors, to hear testimony for Bill number 235-36 COR, sponsored by Senator James Moylan, co-sponsored by Senator Amanda Shelton and Mary Camacho Torres. It's an act to repeal and reenact Section 5011 and 5012 of Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to procurement policies in favor of disability-owned business enterprises. The last item on the agenda is to hear testimony for Bill number 236-36 COR, sponsored by myself, Senator Sabina Flores Perez, co-sponsored by Speaker Therese M. Terlaje, Senator Joanne Brown, Telena Cruz, Nelson, James C. Moylan, Joe S. Agustin, Clynton E. Ridgell, and Telo T. Taitague. It's an act to amend Section 5213 of Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the strengthening the requirements of small purchases. The committee will receive written testimony until 4 p.m. Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. Please address testimony to Senator Sabina Flores Perez, Chairperson of the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning. It can be dropped off at the mailboxes at the Guam Congress Building or emailed to office@senatorperez.org. To begin, we're going to start with the rules of conduct, which is as follows. The host of the hearing will mute all participants until called upon by the chair. Virtual background should not be utilized during the hearing, and the participant's face must be visible at all times. When called to speak, please ensure that you are unmuted and that you're speaking into your microphone. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking, and they shall state their names for record-keeping purposes. The order of questioning will begin with the chairperson, followed by the vice chair, and then by senators. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance and nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Now to begin our agenda. For the executive appointment of Mr. Stephen P. Carbullido to serve as a member of the Guam Environmental Protection Agency Board of Directors. Some of the responsibilities of the board include the following: to manage Guam EPA, which consists, so the board of directors consist of 9 members to be appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the legislature. The board meets approximately once a month. Meetings are open to the public. The board of directors serve as an appellate body. Any citizen who believes he or she has been aggrieved by an action or decision by the board or the administrator can request a hearing before the board. The board also appoints the administrator to administer matters of the agency under the supervision of the board, and they also appoint the deputy administrator, who is not a member of the board and shall not have a right to vote. Notices were sent to Guam EPA and the board of directors. Currently, there are no written testimonies at this time, but we do have oral testimony by the deputy Michelle Lastimosa. I'd like to now recognize Deputy Michelle for her testimony.
Half a day, Senator Perez, Speaker Terlaje, and honorable senators. My name is Michelle Lastimosa, Deputy Administrator for Guam EPA. On behalf of Guam EPA's Administrator, Walter Leon Guerrero, I'm happy to read his testimony in support of the nomination of Mr. Stephen Carbullido to the Guam EPA Board of Directors. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency is pleased with Governor Leon Guerrero's nomination to the Guam EPA Board of Directors, and the agency is in support of her nomination. Today, we ask that you and your colleagues stand with me in support of Mr. Stephen Carbullido. I have a few brief remarks about this fine individual that I'd like to share with you today. Mr. Carbullido has been a member of our board for about 2 years and has been the board's chairperson for almost a year. He has been supportive of the agency and has been an integral part of the board's evolution as a policy board. Mr. Carbullido has guided the board well in his role with the agency to ensure that decisions on an array of matters, such as the use of the recycling revolving fund, enforcement, groundwater protection, and rules and regulations are properly addressed, and with the community's best interest in mind. He is a quick learner and possesses the potential to carry the board into a greener future. I must also add that he's rarely late to meetings, and he has a near perfect attendance record with all meetings overall. As an engineer, Mr. Carbullido complements our board's diverse makeup very well. He is capable in grasping technical concepts and is able to convey his understanding to a non-technical audience. Mr. Carbullido is a proud child of the Marianas, and continued membership with our board will serve our community well. I look forward to his confirmation. Thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts with you all today. And that is signed by Mr. Walter Leon Guerrero. Thank you.
All right, Zus Masi, Deputy Administrator Michelle Lastimosa. I'd like now to invite the nominee himself, Stephen Carbullido, for his testimony.
Thank you, Michelle. Hafaday, Speaker Terlaje, Madam Chairperson, Senator Perez, Senator Duenas, Senator Ada, Senator Moylan, Senator Nelson, Senator Shelton, Senator Taitague, and Senator Brown. Thank you for having me here today. I've prepared brief remarks regarding the state of our island's Environmental Protection Agency's Board of Directors. It has been 3 years since I last appeared before this body, and I thank the members of the legislature for the opportunity to serve. At the time, Guam EPA was working to finalize rules and regulations for the mayor's abandoned vehicle and solid waste cleanup program. The legislature had just passed the plastic bag ban law, and the world began to hear much more about PFAS and how experts, government, industry, and the public were reacting to its potential impacts. Fast forward to today, 3 years later, and I am proud to report that the Recycling Revolving Fund rules and regulations were approved by the board, and the Environmental Cleanup Program, in conjunction with the Mayor's Council and Guam EPA, has removed over 4,000 vehicles, 15,000 tires, and countless white goods, green waste, electronics, and loose metals. The process and accounting for this program continue to be fine-tuned, and I would like to offer a job well done to Mrs. Sabina Sablon and those who support her over at Guam EPA. In addition, the rules and regulations for the plastic bag ban were deliberated, modified, and approved by our board. As of January 1st, 2022, among other positive outcomes from the law, the public will see significantly less plastic litter around our island. I would like to recognize Mr. Glenson Nicholas and his team at Guam EPA for an excellent job on this achievement. Subsequently, we have exhaustively discussed the groundwater protection zone map that delineates Guam's aquifer during our board meetings. The last time this map was updated was in the 1980s, more than 30 years ago. It was reported to our board that it was intended for this map to be updated every 10 years. I am happy to report that at the moment, WERI at the University of Guam is conducting a study that will detail the hydrology of Northern Guam and how it relates to our aquifer. WERI expects to complete this study before the end of the year. With this information, Guam EPA, the GIPA board, the legislature, and our community at large will come together to determine which areas up north can responsibly accommodate more development and which areas need additional safeguards to protect our water resources for future generations. I would like to recognize Brian Bearden and his team at Guam EPA for their work on this. Additionally, the board has approved rules and regulations for underground storage tanks and safe drinking water. The last time the safe drinking water regulations were updated was nearly 20 years ago. Great job by Administrator Walter Leon Guerrero, Deputy Michelle Lastimosa, and all at Guam EPA on getting this done. As you can see, the Guam EPA board is an engaged, busy, and lively body. I am here today as my term as a board member has expired and Governor Leon Guerrero has reappointed me for another 3-year term. I hope that I have earned the legislature's trust to continue serving. There is much work to do over the next 3 years. And that is why this Thursday, as chairman, I will be convening our members at our regular meeting to create and prioritize the goals and objectives that they have for our island's Environmental Protection Agency during our board meetings. There are the mandates from the legislature, the agency's 5-year work plan, and the items important to our community that I am sure will be discussed. Items that I foresee being tackled include the future of the Recycling Revolving Fund. With the mayor's cleanup program nearly on autopilot, the board will consider future additional projects that will yield the best return on investment for our community and island's future. I foresee the board continuing to discuss the island's aquifer and which areas on island need stronger environmental protection and areas on island that may have overly restrictive regulations. This will be based on the hydrology report from WERI. Additionally, I am confident that proposed PFAS action levels will be tackled. And lastly, I foresee the board coming together to ensure that policies and procedures are in place to hold our local and federal stakeholders accountable, to ensure that they are doing their part to be responsible stewards of the environment. The board will continue to exercise its responsibilities and ensure that these policies are working and fine-tuned when necessary. Undonkalo nasizus masi for your time. If confirmed, I look forward to working with each of you to continue developing an island that our people will continue to be proud of.
All right, thank you so much, Chairman Carbullido, for your testimony and also for your service. This will be your second term, I believe, as a board member, and you've already stepped up to the plate as a chairperson. So yeah, I appreciate the overview of what Guam EPA has accomplished over, I guess, maybe the past 2-3 years, and I guess looking forward ahead. You mentioned some very important, initiatives. So I would like to maybe perhaps ask, since you will be convening a meeting on the 20th of this week regarding goals for the upcoming year. I would like to maybe probe you a little bit regarding, what you see as the direction the board should take. And also, I think, perhaps how would you come to that decision is, I think, most important, because, obviously not everything can be determined immediately, right? There's a lot of considerations at stake. So let's go through the Recycling Revolving Fund. You mentioned that it has to be fine-tuned. What do you think are the gaps, in your opinion? Obviously, the board would have to have their to weigh in on this as well. But from your perspective, what do you think are the gaps regarding the Recycling Revolving Fund? Absolutely.
First and foremost, there's this perception that there's a delay in getting the program started. And I think it was last year I inquired with the Mayor's Council's representative, can't we get this project started on October 1st of each year, where we have the paperwork in place and everything's ready to go hit the ground running at the beginning of each fiscal year. And at the time it was stated that because of red tape or bureaucracy, that documents can't be signed for the current fiscal year until the new one has started. That's interesting to me. So at the moment, the way it goes is after September 30, the books have to be closed for the Recycling Revolving Fund program. And then at that time, the attorneys will develop the the MOA for the appropriate signatures, and then only at that time can money be transferred. So I really hope in the future we can get money transferred as soon as possible and be able to start the paperwork in advance.
Okay, sorry, I would like to take this time to acknowledge Senator Joanne Brown. My apologies, you were here earlier, but thank you for joining us today. Okay, so basically it's administrative, so you're thinking administrative, but as far as the rules itself, you know, what do you see as an opportunity to improve?
In terms of like what the program cleans up, like tires and vehicles and white goods and green waste?
Yeah, so, or just anything, do you see any, you said fine tuning it. So I don't know if you were speaking about the regulations itself or just administratively what needs to be done.
I think if we can start the program on October 1st and continue to remove vehicles through September 30, that will yield a huge benefit to our island community.
Okay, so are you aware of the Basel Convention?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so that has put a big stop to export of plastics. So that, I think plastics is something that really needs to be prioritized when we're looking at, you know, perhaps fine tuning the rules and regulations. So, okay.
Absolutely, I would definitely support that.
Okay, and then the other thing you mentioned about the Guam groundwater protection zone map and how it hasn't been updated. So is the position of the board right now, or your position actually, to withhold on adopting the 1986 groundwater protection zone map?
The 1986 groundwater protection zone map is currently in place. We're hoping to get it updated to reflect any changes, if there are any, to the hydrology of Northern Guam.
Okay, so what about the memo that basically recognized the 1976 map? Has that been rescinded?
That has not been rescinded. And so for the people attending, what we're talking about is Guam EPA currently uses the 1986 GPZ map for its regulations. And the one item, to my understanding, that it does not use it for is for subdividing lots over the aquifer. At the moment, it's using the 1978 US EPA sole source aquifer designation. And this map is it's larger in the sense that it includes the coasts of Northern Guam along the west, north, and east. And so at the moment, Department of Land Management, in coordination with Guam EPA, is using that when subdividing lots over the aquifer.
So are you in support of the 1986 map? Should that be the final map? Let's say Weary does their study and they confirm that the 86 map is what they come up with. Are you in support of that map?
To be used to subdivide lots?
To, I guess, yes, to subdivide lots, yes. Committee is now back from recess. So Steve, if you can please proceed what you were saying earlier, if you can try to remember where we left off in that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that we need to take care of not take care, but we need to continue to monitor the nitrate levels, and we should not see it increase to a level that's harmful to human health. It's my understanding that at the time of the hydrology report, that Northern Guam, the flow of fluid goes outwards towards the oceans. And so so I agree that development should not impact human health, such that if we're dividing lots over the aquifer such that there's no sewer system from our public utilities in place, and that you have to have septic tanks, that if it'll adversely impact the concentration levels of the aquifer, then that's definitely something that we need to be careful about.
Great, appreciate that response. I think, yes, as we're adopting a new map, I mean, the 86 map is also outdated because at that time, the nitrate levels were not trending upward as they are today. And so it can cause a condition called methemoglobinemia, which starves the body of oxygen. So this is something that's critical to protect our water resource. I think also too, even though there's this belief that the water is going to run away from our drinking water. So let's say it drains out into the oceans, you know, what is the impact to our coral reefs too as well? You know, there's a eutrophication. If you have too much nitrate, it can cause algal bloom, which also blocks the light and, you know, the proper development of corals. So the health of our corals, it definitely affects the corals too as well. When we think about those types of increased development without any proper treatment. Okay, so the other item that you were talking about, the plastic bag ban. So maybe we can highlight the rules and regs for that, because I know our community is probably very interested in this. So what are some of the details of the rules and regs that the board has approved?
It was mostly at that interim moment, the 2-year period where it was passed, and then the 1-year period where it was partially banned and then I believe fully banned. So we passed rules that allowed for plastic bags under certain conditions, as long as it complies with certain ASTM standard testing methods. And so that has been in effect since, I want to say, last year. And so I believe now it's fully not allowed.
Okay, correct. Yes, it's completely banned, regardless of whether it's classified as biodegradable. So anything else with the rules that you wanted to highlight with that?
No, I think it's a real job well done by Guam EPA for getting us to this point.
Okay. And then the other item, let's see, underground storage tanks. Anything you want to highlight there?
Not so much. That was just to not help, but allow Guam EPA to have enforcement action on those underground tanks.
Okay, and the other big one is the PFAS. Are you familiar? So what is I guess you were talking about setting goals for the year. So what are some of the goals you think might be ahead of us when it comes to PFAS or PFAS?
Right, so Guam EPA is to set levels, interim action levels shall be set at a level below which risks have been determined to be acceptable. And also Guam EPA shall consider water treatment or alternate remedial actions. So at the moment, it's the US EPA levels that govern. And so is my understanding that Guam EPA is working diligently on this and will propose if any more stringent action levels should be pursued.
Okay. And right now, the level is a health advisory, lifetime health advisory limit of 70 parts per trillion. Do you foresee that being decreased?
Yeah, if there's this study and the data behind it as to why it should be monitored more closely, absolutely.
Okay, so I guess that we're definitely looking forward to you know, the changes in that. Regarding the meetings themselves, so I actually attended a couple of meetings, and I noticed that there wasn't an opportunity for the public. As I see in other meetings, there is nothing in the agenda that allows for open public discussion. And being that, you know, now that we have to post the agenda items in advance, is this something that the board would be amending as far as their agenda to ensure that there's allowance for public input for any of the items discussed?
Absolutely. During our Thursday board meeting, we're going to be discussing our agenda format, our agenda topics, and our agenda goals. So that's something that I'll definitely bring up. It is a function of the 5-day notice and the 2-day notice going out, making sure it's on that. And so I see no issue with allowing for a public comment period.
Okay, so great. So another item that I guess another issue is the open burn, open detonation permit. What is your view on that?
I agree that we need to pursue alternative technologies. I'm in support of anything that's cleaner and efficient. And also, I would like to see the technology implemented, if it's feasible, immediately, in the sense that there's no gap in not being able to do anything with unexploded ordinances that we find in the community.
And what about monitoring? Do you see, or any other ways of addressing the harm from an open burn, open detonation?
I'm also fully in support of increasing the monitoring program, whether that's increasing staff, increasing utilization associated to focus on those tasks. It's important to know the effects of these activities. And so I'm definitely in support of increasing the monitoring program to do that.
Because currently the permit basically has, I believe, they basically have one event. Yeah, so that seems to be very minimal, and it needs to be beefed up for sure. Okay, so the other things I see that, in your packet, there is no conflict of interest. Well, I should ask the question, do you have any conflict of interest?
No, I don't have any. There was one notice of violation case. I recused myself, but I haven't had any issues.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you for your responses, Steve. And yeah, we do appreciate you accepting the reappointment and your service. All right, so I would like to also recognize Senator Mary Torres, who has joined us here today. Okay, so now I will open up the floor to my colleagues for any questions. Speaker Therese Terlaje, who is also my Vice Chair of the Environment, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Carbullido, for agreeing to serve in this capacity again and for your work over the past couple of years. I just have a couple questions. So you said that the recycling, the mayor's ability to pick up the abandoned vehicles is kind of on autopilot now, and that you are going to be considering other uses of the recycling revolving fund. Could you just elaborate on that more? Do you think mayors agree that they have been allocated enough for the cleanup of abandoned vehicles?
Right, that's exactly what I'm referring to. The idea would be whether we can increase the amount going to them. Can they physically spend the money within the timeframes? And that's what I mean. Can we start picking up trash October 1st, or not trash, but vehicles, tires, waste, and through September 30? And if we're allowed to do that, can we allow for more money to be given to them? Or if there's not enough manpower to do that, is there another program that we can do to allow for a great return on investment for our community?
All right, yeah. I am concerned that, yeah, if the mayors don't, that if the mayors can do it, yeah, I agree with you that we should just give them more and allow them to continue to do it. So what is that impediment that, I know you described it a little bit, but is it, of course, the contracts can't be signed until the new fiscal year, but what is the impediment to having that all done in the first day? Is it AG review will not happen prior to that?
I'm not sure what the holdup is, but it's my understanding that they won't even, not they, but the process isn't even started until well into the new fiscal year.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your efforts to get to the bottom of that and to correct that for this fiscal year coming up. has the board considered alternative septic tanks? There was a hearing once regarding this quarter lots and whether, we need sewer versus can allow septic tanks. And at that time, someone testifying had said that EPA should consider alternative types of septic tanks and authorize those. And have they done that? Or is that part of the business that you expect to look at?
Right. I remember that topic. I want to say it was back in 2019. And since then, it hasn't been brought up. One item that I foresee that would need to be addressed would be the operation and maintenance of those facilities. I definitely see pros as to why it would be a great idea. And then also we would need to make sure that whoever it is that's responsible for the operation and maintenance of that facility is ensuring it's getting it done.
All right. The reason, yeah, of course, is because if we can allow more use of this property, right, for residential development in smaller areas, then more houses, right, and supposedly more affordable housing. And so that's the goal. But of course, there's strong pressure for that. And I really want EPA to step up and make sure that we can balance that with other types of technology or, pushes right now while we've got ARP money to bring the sewer into the areas most necessary. And I know GWA has been working on some of that. They've told us some of their plans for a couple areas, but so far, it's limited. So I just think EPA should lend their voice to that and push for sewer to be brought out to a lot more of these areas. And then with sewer, we can divide the lots smaller and supposedly, allow for additional housing to be built on the same area of land. All right. And so you worked for GHD. Is that still correct? And
That's correct.
And I know that the chairperson asked you about conflicts, but I just wanted to, I guess, just very briefly hit on that. So GHD had a consulting contract for closure of the ORDOT dump, and I know received an award for that as well. But can you just elaborate? Does the company have any other contracts that with the government of Guam or with EPA, or does it do any type of work like that?
Right. It's my understanding that the company does not have any contracts with Guam EPA. We were the construction management firm on Liaison Landfill and also other GWA projects. I have not had any conflicts of interest that have risen over the past 3 years.
Okay. All right. Great. And do you believe that the penalties for violations of the I'm trying to remember, erosion and all of those laws, that they have been addressed adequately by the board?
What do you mean by the board?
Well, the board is the one, the director sets a penalty. The board, I think, now has to approve or review those penalties, right? And the notices of violation and the actions that the administrator negotiates with the violators, as to how they are going to be brought into compliance. And I just want to know if you think that the board has adequately fulfilled that role, and if they've looked at the penalties to see whether they are adequately curbing violations or not. And if not, if we could get a recommendation or any recommendations as to that. I think we are been concentrating in the past year over enforcement, right? Like to make sure the boards are actually brought in the loop, that the enforcement's actually done. And we've seen that. So I just want to know if there's any other recommendations from the board as to the policy behind it, whether the penalties are enough, whether the way the structure is that you are adequately enabled to enforce those laws.
Right. So I believe the new law passed last year after July, August. So I haven't seen an uptick in notices of violations since then in regards to erosion control. But we have 2 or 3 matters that are pending before the board. One is currently being heard with our hearing officer and the board, and it's still ongoing. The other 2 have yet to kick off as we're procuring a new hearing officer. So those are all ongoing. But in terms of the new law and how its effects have, what impacts it has had on what would have been a violation, I haven't seen an uptick since last August.
All right. But do you believe the board has the tools it needs to properly enforce these laws?
I believe the board does.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Carbullido.
Susan Mossy, Speaker Terlaje. Just a quick question, Mr. Carbullido, would it be possible if you can post your written testimony on the chat for my colleagues to review?
I don't have the means to do it at this minute.
Okay, all right. Well, we can maybe work on that afterwards. Thank you. Okay, so now I'd like to open the floor to Senator Nelson, if she has any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Carpolita, I want to thank you and congratulate you for the amount of work that you've done in the past as being a member of the board. I appreciate you coming prepared to this hearing, also mentioning your mission and vision and the way forward. We don't really get a lot of feedback from some of the members of the board or boards that we are looking to confirm as far as, a way ahead. And so I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you acknowledging the hard workers at EPA like Mrs. Lastimosa and Mrs. Akfaji. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And I know sometimes it may be, you may feel that it's underappreciated, but the island of Guam does thank you. And we do see the tangible fruits of your labor. So thank you very much. And I look forward to your confirmation, Steve. I want to thank you for just, stepping up to the plate and looking to be a service to the people. So congratulations and good luck on the upcoming years.
Thank you, Susan Mossy.
All right, thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Chris Duenas.
Susan Mossy, Madam Chair. Mr. Carbullido, thank you to join my colleagues and thanking you for your continued willingness to serve. With all the questions you fielded this morning, I know you probably couldn't take the cut and pay, but I think Walter is a challenge for his job. You've handled it very well. But Walter's a good friend of mine, and I'm sure he's going to stay exactly where he's at. But I wanted to thank you for your willingness to serve. And, along the questions that the speaker was asking, this was the only question I had. Like I said, you have come very well prepared and it seemed extremely fit for this position. One of the things with the most recent issue on the back road in terms of the erosion and that issue that took place with the current contractor who's building that solar farm. One of the questions that came up in a lot of the oversight was, and the director mentioned that, there is a lack of staffing and resources for staffing in terms of monitoring. And that was a concern to many of us in the legislature. And so at the board level, how has that been addressed? And also one of the questions that some of my colleagues had was, certainly there are always challenges with resources, particularly in staffing and funding. But, has the board also through its meetings, kind of worked with the staff, the director, the deputy, and other staff members to identify prioritization, particularly on some of these key, high profile, not necessarily high profile, but large projects, which, probably require additional monitoring. And so what has been the board involvement in the area? I think that's of concern to the community and many of us.
Absolutely. So recently we get reports on the hiring notices and how much staff they're looking to hire. But absolutely, this Thursday, I want to also drill down with the board members to make tracking staffing a high priority, or the utilization of man hours and resources to ensure that violations can be prevented. Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, having served as a director before, I know there's a fine line, and I know we have the team here today, and I want to just be clear. There's always a fine line between micromanaging and allowing, you know, an agency to do its job. But there's also just that, you know, I look at the board, as I've served two boards before, as being really that check and balance, you know, much like the legislature, you know, takes its role as well. And so, at, you know, at least making sure that, at a minimum, making sure that, you know, that's an action item for the board consistently, to basically, you know, kind of review management's responsibility, employees, and you know, encourage, provide resources as needed. But the biggest thing is to ensure that, you know, many of us, as we look from the outside, like I said, it's not our operation. You know, we should stay on our lane to a certain extent. But the thing is really, you know, when we see things where we see more eyes and more prioritization can be put, you know, I just wanted to make sure that that's high on your list. Particularly, you seem to, as mentioned before, be very active in your capacity and take your role very seriously.
Absolutely. Thank you. No, thank you, Senator Duenas. I appreciate that.
So, Mr. Carbullido, I look forward to supporting your nomination. As has been mentioned once again, you have come forward extremely prepared, and I'm very confident with the answers that you've been able to you know, handle questions today, and as well as your acumen. I think you're a fine representation for the board. So Happy New Year. God bless you, and good luck in your endeavors in the future. Sidus Masi.
Thank you, Sidus Masi.
All right, thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Telo Taitague, yeah, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Carbullido, for stepping up to the plate once again, and I'm sure there's other things you can do with your time, but serving the people of Guam is an honor, and it's definitely something that the people of Guam, you know, thank you for. And I personally thank you for stepping up to the plate to do this, because with your background, which you have background in environmental assessments and studies, I greatly appreciate you utilizing it in this capacity. A lot of the questions that I had were asked by my colleagues earlier, and of course, providing your testimony, I too would like a copy of it. It makes it easier to not, you know, reiterate what you spoke about, but things that you might not have spoke about. So I do have one concern with regards to a bill that's coming up. It's becoming very controversial. And regarding the US EPA's, regarding their compliance on emissions, on air emissions, especially with this bill coming up on the PD power plant scenario. And how is the board or what is EPA or the board taking with regards to their concerns or addressing any issues that may come about? So is the board talking about this?
No, this is news to me. Not very privy on this bill in regards to the new PD power plant, but I'd definitely be more interested to learn about it.
Well, it's more of a generator that they plan on putting in place, and there's some concerns that involve the air emissions from that, utilizing ultra low sulfur diesel rather than what they've been using in the past and having a school nearby. So if you can, Mr. Carbullido, can you look into that? Because the bill is coming up for public hearing this week. And I'm sure a lot of us are going to look at EPA for their guidance and their input and their expertise in this matter. So I appreciate if you could look into that. Okay.
Absolutely.
As well as the deputy director that's here. We're going to, hopefully you'll be there to testify as well on this bill to give us some guidance on the, you know, how, on an environmental perspective. Also, Mr. Carbullido, has the board discussed, well, you know, the landfill, it's coming up a lot faster than we anticipated. And has the board discussed any waste to energy solutions or, you know, zero waste initiatives?
We have not tackled waste to energy.
At all? Okay, no.
No, and that'd be something that it'd be great to have a conversation with Walter and the staff about that.
Okay, so no company has come forth to the board to discuss this subject.
No.
It's good to hear. And then also waste to energy initiatives. Has anyone come to the board to discuss this at all?
No.
Okay. Well, those are the areas that I think need to be looked into, you know. So I hope I didn't give you too much homework on that, but.
No, no problem at all.
Okay. Well, I thank you again so much for
Thank you.
continuing on in this role. And of
Thank you,
course,
Senator Taitague.
Happy New Year to you. And my door is always open if there's anything I can do to assist you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Telo. Speaker, you had one more comment or question?
Yes, I just wanted to, sorry. Yeah, I was following up with Mayor Alec, the president of the Mayor's Council, regarding that recycling revolving fund. And so just to let you know, his point of view is that they can still use additional money for the larger villages, Dedido, Jigo, Bargata, Hagat. But the issue is they can only give up to $50,000 per vendor. So I guess if we could work together to resolve that. Thank you.
Great.
Are you aware of that?
I think the issue is once the money hits the mayor's council, they divvy it up amongst the 19 villages as opposed to it just being one bucket of money all the mayors can use.
No, they said they have a restriction that they can only give up to $50,000 per vendor. That,
Oh, okay, because before it used to be less, and then there was a new law that was passed that upped it to 50,000.
so we need to look at that. If you could help us. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Speaker. So now I'd like to recognize Senator Tony Ada. Thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Carbullido, and thank you for answering the governor's call to, serve again on the board. I agree with Senator Duenas. You probably fielded more questions as a nominee for reconfirmation, but rightfully so, because the Environmental Protection Agency is the agency that protects our air, our land, and our drinking water. And you've answered the questions that my colleagues had asked, and I was just listening to your answers, and it seems that you have everything in place, and I appreciate that. And I look forward to working with you and working with EPA in the future to ensure that the quality of our air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and our land is saved for future generations, our children and grandchildren. So I thank you for that, sir, and I look forward to voting on your confirmation, and you have my support. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ada.
All right, thank you, Senator Ada. Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Hafide, Steve, thank you very much for your willingness to serve once again, for all of the work that you've put in over the last several years. I want to thank you for your collaboration, especially with the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. We see from the support of the administration there that you are leading the board well, and the team at EPA well. So I want to thank you for that. And I was impressed over the last few months, especially with EPA's efforts of the outreach campaign for the plastic bag ban, and seeing EPA more involved and hearing more from them in recent months. It's been a pleasure to see that, and I'm sure it comes from your leadership as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing what comes out of your next meeting with your goal setting with other members of the board, and to see what you have for the future. And I appreciate that as a younger person like yourself, to see you thinking about the future and what that means for our generation and the generations to come after.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Shelton.
Okay, all right, thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Carbullido, thank you for your testimony. I really appreciate your insight of the responsibility that you have as a board member. I like your vision and what you plan to do. I like that you have the dedication to not miss a meeting and wanting to do a lot more and stepping up once again to be part of the board. So thank you for accepting the nomination, and I will vote favorably when this comes to session floor. Congratulations.
Thank you, Senator Moylan.
All right, thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Joanne Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and certainly good morning to you, Mr. Carbullido. Certainly your background is very beneficial to your role in serving in the Guam EPA board in your capacity as chairman. But I do want to ask you, I mean, I think we all recognize the important role Guam places. Goodness, I was deputy there like almost 30 years ago. Probably ages me a bit, but what I've not seen and what I'd like to see more of is actual real enforcement by Guam EPA. I often hear all the reasons why things are not being done, and we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough personnel, and granted, Guam EPA pretty much has not grown since I was there. But at the same time, we used to be able to maximize our resources and focus on key issues that we thought needed critical investment by the agents, particularly during a time of significant construction and growth. We're not currently going through that now. I mean, we have discussion about the military, the new military base, but overall, we have not had that level of construction in quite almost that length of time. But I don't hear as often Guam EPA being more aggressive with regards to enforcement. And I think we see a lot of violations in the community. And I want to know, with your direction in continuing on in your capacity, what leadership direction can you provide to help strengthen that area? Because I'm not scared of Guam EPA, quite frankly, these days. While it has a very important role and presence, and it's nice we're doing plastic bags, but there are more serious environmental violations that are happening. And I just don't see the sharp teeth by Guam EPA and actually being out there, being more directly engaged and doing greater levels of enforcement with the type of violations that are happening and that we see out there. So I wanted to get feedback with you with regards to that.
Absolutely. I'm definitely in support of increasing staff utilization, man hours towards construction site inspections to ensure that the contractor's best management practices are in place, ensure they're following the plans and specifications, and that we're not discharging erosion and sediment from these project sites. And so I want to get together this Thursday at our board meeting to make it a priority to get more enforcement out there, and also if they need more staff or they need to shift people over or hours in a week, that they have, that the board is looking at that.
Mm-hmm. And I realize we're never going to always get an ideal amount of people, and as I mentioned, I've not seen the growth of other agencies have grown, other agencies have significantly decreased, like Public Works, for example. We see those changes, but as I mentioned, one of the things you do is you maximize the resources that you have. That while I realize we can always say we don't have enough personnel, that shouldn't be an excuse as to why Guam EPA is not performing its critical duties, especially because the agency has such significant authority. And when it doesn't exercise that, and let's not go back too far, I mean, let's go back and look at the Marble Cay project, the impact of that last year. And for me, having known and actually worked in that job for 4 years during the time of tremendous development, I do not understand how Guam EPA, during a time when we don't have anywhere near that level, is not maintaining consistent on-site inspection, because I feel very much the agency had a large degree of responsibility in not ensuring its authorities and going out and doing regular inspections of that site. And I'm sure, I assume you were chairman at the time that incident occurred. So I'd like to know, what direction or leadership have you put in place to perhaps put a fire under the key enforcement people in your agency, including your administrator and deputy, because I used to regularly go out and inspect sites. I didn't simply leave it to just the employees. I was very hands-on. That's my style. Maybe not everyone has that degree of style, but I think it's necessary when you have limited resources. I think when your staff sees you out there carrying the load and being engaged with them directly and having hands-on, that really creates a very positive dynamic, even when you have limited personnel and limited resources. So since that incident happened, what direction have you put in place and guidance you as chairman have provided to your board members and more directly to the administrator, ensure in the future that Guam EPA is not absent in doing proper inspections? And certainly with your background, your educational background and the work that you do, and I'm something you're very passionate about, I think you can agree that that was a very big slip up on the part of the agency. The erosion that had resulted from that could have been avoided had the proper erosion control measures, including those pond and basins being put in place before massive earth moving was allowed. So I want to get your feedback on that and what has been put in place differently since that time so that we don't move forward and end up with a similar problem such as that.
Yes, so the notice of violation is pending before our board, subject to procuring a hearing officer. So we will be tackling that in the near future. In terms of after that, right, Guam EPA reported that they have not enough staff and at the time, and so even up to now, and so we get reports on what they're hiring, what they want to hire. We have a HR member on our board as well, and so we're constantly following up on the administrative hiring. But in addition to that, it's Guam EPA is separated in divisions, and I'm not sure how easy it would be to work share, but that's something that I believe should definitely be done in terms of increasing man hours and enforcement.
Well, again, I hate to hear that used as an excuse because we have the same amount of personnel overseeing Menengan Hills and a number of hotels and golf courses at the same time. So while I recognize that, and I can appreciate that as a reason, that to me should not be the primary reason. And while, I'll evaluate in my own self, I think you have a lot of potential. But, this happened during your chairmanship. And I would like to think that in your experience now moving forward, that you'll be a little more aggressive in requiring a lot more effort, because that was too big a project for Guam EPA to let slip by and to say, oh, I don't have enough personnel, or who's the head of the division? Even if it took one enforcement officer to go out there with some regularity, which they should have. Because that to me, while we can, do our adverse, we can do the notice of violations, that doesn't matter after the damage is done. And the fact that Guam EPA itself was disengaged from that process is very concerning to me. We can pat ourselves on the back, but when we have those type of environmental damages happening, when the agency has signed off and authorized those projects to be constructed, and then it itself is not going out there doing the proper regulatory responsibility that it has on behalf of this community, I mean, that raises a big question mark. So I hope you are being a little more aggressive, because we can all kumbaya, but if that's the outcome of what's going on now, that's nothing to be proud of. And I recognize there's a lot of good work being done, but we should never allow projects like that to slip by. And if we don't have the people to regulate it, then we shouldn't be out there authorizing it. We shouldn't be out there approving projects we don't have the ability to properly oversee, because we're doing a greater disservice to our community, our culture, our history, and our expectation, especially in this day and age. That we should have a better standard and a better expectation of performance from a very critical agency that we all depend on. So I appreciate, Mr. Carbullido, your interest in continuing. I hope you take this as a very big learning experience, but also demand more of your people. And if they can't perform, then, you hold them up to be responsible. But this is not something I look and gloss over, especially just knowing the inner workings of the agency and its capabilities, and then not seeing that exercise. And the reason I keep hearing is, oh, we don't have enough personnel. That action was inexcusable, especially by the key agency, your agency more than any other agency. During that type of construction, we would have expected to be at the forefront. So with that, I appreciate your responding to my questions. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to comment on his nomination.
Thank you, Senator Brown, for your questions. So now I'd like to recognize Senator Mary Torres, if she has any comments or questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen, I want to, first of all, thank you for your consideration of the nomination, and for your commitment as well, and your effort in your role on the board. We know with Guam coming up, there's a lot of movement that's going to be happening with regard to the military and the development of Camp Blas, for example, and that coming to fruition. So what is on many of our the forefront of our concerns is controlled development, and how that plays out with the use of our natural resources, the effect on the water and the pollution of our waters, and generally the deforestation of Guam. Are these controlled developments also at the forefront of your concerns with EPA? And can you discuss that a little bit in terms of how we regulate the use of our natural resources, the preservation of at least a portion or a percentage of our natural resources, and how that all plays out with energy, water, and in general, how we go forward in Guam with our modernization?
Absolutely. I think our northern Guam Lands aquifer is one of the biggest resources that we talk about. And so that's also where Camp Plaza is located and a lot of development is taking place. And so at the moment, there is regulations in place on what can be done over the aquifer, and it's using the 1986 groundwater protection zone map. And so by the end of this year, we look forward to hearing from WERI at UOG that they're going to complete their hydrology study and see if we do need to put additional safeguards to protect, like we mentioned earlier, the nitrate levels in the aquifer, or if certain parts of the island can see additional development in regards to, like Speaker Terlaje was saying, with more housing lots and whatnot.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I just want to say that, you clearly have the advantage of youth. You've been educated most recently in some of the more modern and progressive approaches to environmental protection. And I'm very confident and reassured, Stephen, that you have the wherewithal to do your best and to really make good at EPA and generally for Guam. So I just want to say that, you have my support, and just want to encourage you to continue to fight the good fight and to do the good work, which you've demonstrated that you are committed to do. So thank you again, Stephen.
Thank you, Senator Torres.
All right, thank you, Senator Torres. I think that's all my colleagues that are here today. So yes, Steve, I think there are a lot of issues and concerns that were raised, and I do hope that in your position on the board that you will not only continue to uphold the regulations, but to be proactive. I think there's a lot of gaps in the current laws that exist, and that Guam is such a small island that some of these laws don't quite fit with adequate protections of our environment. And the whole thing about cumulative impacts too is of concern for me. And I think perhaps if there's ways that the board might be able to recommend strengthening our environmental laws, because there's an issue of the tragedy of the commons, right? Are you familiar with that concept?
No.
Yeah. So yeah, tragedy of the commons is everybody has access to the public goods, as well as the responsibility of protecting it. But if we don't collectively protect it, then it will get destroyed piece by piece. And this is something I truly want to avoid happening here. I mean, we're seeing a lot of large developments, and this is something that's really of concern for me. If we're thinking about 7 generations from now. So I do appreciate your commitment to being on the board, and I do hope to work with you on forging ahead on making a more sustainable island and protect our environment. So Stu's Masi, and thank you for your service to Guam.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
So being that there are no other testimonies and comments at this time, confirmation is now complete. And so thank you for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you, Senators.
All right, thank you to Chairman Carbullido and Guam EPA for their presence. So now we're going to move on to the second item on the agenda, which is to hear testimony for Bill 235-36 COR, sponsored by Senator James Moylan, co-sponsored by Senators Amanda Shelton and Mary Camacho Torres. It's an act to repeal and reenact Section 5011 and 50112 of Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to procurement policies in favor of disability-owned business enterprises. So again, I'd like to recognize my colleagues, Speaker Therese Terlaje, Senator Joanne Brown, Senator Amanda Shelton, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Tony Addis, Senator Telo Taitague, Senator Jim Williams, and Senator Mary Torres. And I would also like to recognize Attorney John Brown, who's here, who's a frequent supporter of procurement reform, as well as Director Byrne. Thank you for joining us here today. So I would like to give the floor to the sponsor of the bill to provide introductory remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. And yes, this bill is to enhance favorable procurement policies for disability-owned business enterprises. And I want to thank my co-sponsors as well, Senator Shelton and Senator Torres. Basically, we're adding to the existing qualification being service disabled veterans business enterprises. And we're adding 2 additional classes of this. And the additional distinctions are clarified and identified by the U.S. Small Business Association and other major third-party organizations nationally to determine the types of disabilities to qualify. The 2 additional qualifiers are 1, disability-owned business enterprise, which is a business primarily owned by an individual with disability. And the second is veterans disability-owned business enterprise, which is a business primarily owned by a veteran with disability where the disability did not occur during their tenure in service. So these 2 categories will then join the service disability veterans business, which we currently have. So the intent of the legislation is not only to modify the current statute, but also to bring to light and encourage the growth of small business, inclusive with those residents who are either veterans or individuals with disabilities. Whether their objective is to provide products or services to the local government or the community in general by securing national certification would also open many doors for grants and other services. So with the current statute of our state of our economy, as a government, we need to create opportunities for financial independence, and simple measures like Bill 235 can assist in this process. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to provide the introduction.
All right, thank you, Senator Moylan. Director Byrne, if it looks like he's on the phone right now. So maybe I'll open the floor to Attorney Brown for his testimony. Good morning. If you can unmute yourself, please. Yeah, you're still muted.
There we go.
Okay, great. One more time. You're still muted. Sorry, Attorney Brown. Yeah, there you go. Oh, not quite.
This time?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Maybe I keep clicking it too many times, back and forth. But anyway, thank you again for for the sponsors and your hearing of this matter. On this bill, I support it. It's in line with prior efforts made in this legislature to increase socially beneficial preferences in award of government contracts. For instance, a bill was recently passed and became law that gave a preference to women-owned businesses, which is also measured against its similar federal SBA program. While I'm generally in favor of this bill, my confidence in it is mainly because it is modeled by reference to the federal counterparts, which have spent much more than 3 decades working through a lot of the defects in the system, and they still haven't managed to get rid of them, unfortunately. It's not smooth riding at the federal level. There's a lot of fraud in the system due to those who flaunt eligibility requirements and hide behind obscure corporate structure. For instance, in 2009, the GAO released a report entitled Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Program Case Studies Show Fraud and Abuse Allowed Ineligible Firms to obtain millions of dollars in contracts. I've mentioned this in a written statement that I've provided, and there's a link to that report, over a decade old now. But the case studies that it mentions are just symptomatic of the ones that continue. In 2019, a law firm reported that former CEO of Virginia-based defense contractor ADS Tactical agreed to pay $20 million to settle False Claims Act allegations that he steered ADS to fraudulently procure small business set-aside contracts for which ADS was ineligible itself. A secret controlled and struck deals with a small puppet company and companies to win the set-aside contracts. This goes to the point that has been mentioned in the explanation that this is for businesses that are owned by particular classes of people, as mentioned by Senator Moylan. It's the ownership that becomes the weak link in this, because it is so easy to hide behind an LLC and other things. But in this bill, it's not just all ownership, except when we're talking about service disabled veteran business enterprises. The disability owned business enterprise and the veteran disability owned business enterprise don't rely simply on an ownership. Rather, they are both, those two classifications, both owned and operated and controlled by an individual with a disability. But under the Service Disabled Veterans Business Enterprise, it's only owned. It has no mention that there's a requirement of control and operation. And it's a lot harder to buzz over, work around whether a person operates or controls. But the ownership of it is very simple these days, and it is done as a matter of course. That's how we can't follow the trail in procurement in a lot of cases anymore, because the only information we get is that it's owned by an LLC, for instance, or even a corporation. Corporations can do the same thing. They set up tiered ownership that hides the actual ownership. So I can't understand why, in the case of service disabled veteran business enterprises, we limit it to simply being owned by 51%. That turns that into not a business, but an investment. You know, the nice thing about this is that it gives jobs to disabled people. Disabled people get a lot of personal satisfaction and integrity. Their own integrity is enhanced by having a business that they have a say in. But that's not going to be the case here in a lot of places. So the other thing that I have an issue with in this bill is that the language says, notwithstanding any other provisions of the law, rule, or regulation to the contrary, for purposes of 5011 of this chapter, which is the general policy that we're talking about, a business concern shall be qualified for the policy in favor of preference for disabled veterans. But our laws, rules, and regulations uniformly require that nobody gets a contract if the bidder or offeror is non-responsible, or if the bidder, offer, or proposal is non-responsible to the government's requirements spelled out in the solicitation. That language, notwithstanding any of the provision of the law, rule, or regulation to the contrary, It seems to say that the business concerned shall be qualified for the policy. You don't look any further than whether they're qualified under the policy terms, but not under the procurement terms. So I would suggest that we have an additional section 4. Reading section 5004 is amended by adding thereto the following subsection. Subsection C, no government contract shall be made or awarded set which by preference or otherwise is made to a bidder, offeror, or contractor that is non-responsible or is the result of a bid, offer, or proposal that is non-responsible to the needs and requirements of a solicited contract as described in the solicitation. So we need to go into these things with eyes wide open. There is a history of significant frauds. The federal agencies awarded over, in one report, federal agencies awarded over $100 billion through set-aside programs, which amounts to over 10% of the billions spent on federal contracts that year. A significant part of that money is going to be fraudulently sidetracked. And that just, to the extent that that happens, it's like honey to a bee. It just attracts more. So we need to have in place strong rules to be able to ferret out those fraudulent activities and stop them in their tracks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Attorney Brown. So we can stay for questions a little bit later. I'd like to, if that's possible, we're going to have other testimony provided as well. If you have some questions. We do appreciate if we can stay a little bit longer. Okay, so Director Byrne, my apologies. I called you earlier, but you were busy at the moment, so I appreciate you waiting. If you can provide any comments or testimony on this bill, appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, for the opportunity to speak to the contents of this bill. DOA is generally in favor of this bill, as you might well expect. With regard to the practicalities of it, I think I have just 3 comments. One is based upon what Mr. Brown has just been talking about, is that in some cases in the past, and it appears that we've got some elements here that we still haven't yet cleared up, is how to establish that a business really qualifies under these provisions. Mr. Brown made some comments about complex corporate structures. I've had some experience of these in the past, not in this particular context, but in other contexts. And procurement is time-consuming enough in itself. I'm not sure that we're equipped, unless there is clear evidence of some fraud that obviously would be investigated. But we are not really equipped to deal and unravel some of these complex corporate structures for general day-to-day procurements. With respect to some of the wording in the bill, and I know this wording was carried forward from the previous law, but in section 5110, where it talks about being able to be performed within the period, I think it would be helpful if we had clarification on that, because within might mean at a point of time in the period. I think the intent is that the bidder would be able to complete the contract throughout the required period. So hopefully we could get some clarification on the wording for that. And most of all, this is kind of important to me, is we want to make sure that the bidder identifies themselves clearly when submitting a bid. The onus should be on the bidder and not on the procurement authorities to determine whether a bid falls within this provision, and it isn't always clear. And I would like, if we're inserting some wording, and I'll provide some wording from this to the committee, to include some wording that the evidence must come from the bidder and not be derived by the procurement authorities. Other than that, Madam Chair, as I said, we support this bill.
Thank you so much, Director Byrne, for your testimony. So, so I just have a question regarding to Attorney Brown. So you had mentioned about the service disabled veteran business enterprise, that it only recognizes those that are owned by service disabled veterans. It doesn't expand it to operated and controlled. Do you think the language, if we added that language in that section to include that, would that suffice to address the concerns you mentioned earlier? Sorry, yeah, you're on mute right
Oh,
now.
yeah, okay, I'm gotta unmute. To the extent that helps, it won't stop it. One of the things is that we're using the SBA as a filter, and that's a good thing. But even the SBA has let a lot of this stuff get through the filters. One of the other things that has been a benefit to the federal government's riding herd on some of this fraud is the False Claims Act. If you have implied that you are qualified to receive this benefit, but you're not, you're making a false claims. And that can be revealed by a whistleblower who gives a percentage of the false claims recovery. And that's big business, is ratting on people who are defrauding the government. And you know, and I'd rather have the government get the money back than worry about some fraudulent person being ratted on. So you know, we may at some point want to think about a local False Claims Act that will again backstop this thing. There's no one shot fixes everything. You've got to build up your defenses, starting with the foundation and working up to the walls and the ceiling, the parapets. So yeah, that would I would certainly recommend that operated and managed be added to the ownership provision where it's missing.
I appreciate the response. Director Byrne, so how much time would you need to develop any regulations for this?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Well, we're really looking at all the regulations because they need updating rather badly for some of the legislation that's come in the last 2 or 3 years. So we are planning to do that this year. I haven't sat down with my staff yet and determined an actual schedule, but if important, we will obviously fast track it.
So yeah, definitely there would be regulations that would need to be in place before implementing something like this, I would imagine.
Yes, indeed. You know, as I said just a few minutes earlier, you know, the actual practicalities of this, and indeed the practicalities of a number of procurement concerns, right, are something that's at the top of my head. But we certainly intend during the course of 2022 to go through all the regulations and update them, and certainly you know, we would quickly try and deal with in accordance with the AAA Act, you know, with this legislation if passed.
Okay. All right, thank you, Director Byrne. Maybe if I can go back to Attorney Brown. So the amendment that you recommended would that be sufficient to address the concern that you raised regarding fraud, prevention of fraud?
No, a law never prevents fraud. It's enforcement that prevents fraud. So no matter what language we have, we're not going to be preventing fraud. That's why I suggested we may want, in addition to making it clear that ownership alone will not give you qualification, you also have to have 51%, or you have to have control and management of the business. And the control test it follows the federal tax law on when the interest isn't controlled or managed. So it's fairly clear how to interpret those matters. But, people who want to defraud the government are looking for areas that they can squeeze through. And there's so many places where, and again, in my testimony, I cited if you go to the smallgovcon.com website, which is looks at the fraud in some of these things. It includes reports of the DOD Inspector General, GAO, and other sources about how this fraud takes place. So, we need to know how it takes place so that we can go in with eyes wide open, expecting it, not saying, oh no, these are all nice people. They're, these are disabled people. They wouldn't try to do it. Well, some disabled people do try to do it. And in other cases, they don't even know, because this doesn't require 100% ownership. It doesn't require 100% management. And when you bring in other people, they have different priorities. And so you're going to need to have reviews. And it's difficult to do that in a time when it's so easy to hide ownership of any entity.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that response. So now I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues. Speaker Therese Terlaje.
Well, I want to thank Director Byrne and Attorney Brown for their testimony. It is a little disheartening, I think, to hear that we are not equipped to ensure that we will not be subject of fraud but I understand that, but I'm wondering if there's something that additional we can do. I mean, I hear you, Mr. Attorney Brown, about looking at the cases of fraud that have occurred, and are there recommendations on that website for states as to how to better write these bills or laws, or have they made changes to the federal law to prevent that fraud or to try to filter out more? I see the SBA certification that you talked about as well, but have they made any additional recommendations that we haven't included in here?
Yeah, they've been working for several years now to have a more complete disclosure requirement. When in our procurement law, we have a disclosure requirement that up until I think it was passed an amendment to expand the disclosure levels a little bit. They're making it across the federal government. They're requiring all agencies to put in a common source all the information they have on who they're doing business with. And they're just opening it up, and they have to reveal ownerships of the first tier. When the first owner is an entity, they have to explain who that is. If there's a sufficient size owner in the next tier, they have to go. They just drill right down through all of this lead that we put up by allowing these entities to do whatever they basically want to do.
So are you saying we're able to use those, and that would solve the problem?
Look, when you shine light on disease, it kills it.
Yeah. All right. Well, what about
the words that they were talking about, adding operated or control ownership, 51% is one thing, operated or controlled. Do you have definition? Do we, Mr. Byrne, have definitions for those words? Does that mean if I put in a manager who's a veteran that takes care of this requirement because he's the manager and he supposedly, you know, operates, or yeah, how would we define those terms? Or do you support the use of those terms, Mr. Byrne? To include the word, I don't know, I heard it earlier, operated or controlled in addition to owned? Or do you stay with owned?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's all three, right? It needs to be owned, operated, and controlled.
And not or, so and. That's a big difference. Okay.
Yes. And you know, Mr. Brown talked about IRS definitions, and they struggle with this. Revenue authorities around the world struggle with this as to who actually does control. And you know, we can only do we can do our best to formulate a law and a regulation that captures this. And yes, you know, there is a possible inconsistency with the word operated, but I think that's generally taken to mean that that an owner or is actually involved in the business. I think that's what it's actually meant to mean. But I agree, you know, it's ambiguous, and so the best thing we can do is to use all three and cause the bidder to confirm that the bidder is in fact the owner, the operator, and controls the operation.
All right. Can you tell us how many people or how many procurements that you've seen involve where they've claimed they're subject to this provision in the past couple of years? I mean, how, you know, and do you
I don't have that. I don't have that.
Expect that this. Go ahead, Mr. Byrne.
Sorry, I don't have that number, but I can only think of one or two that has actually secured a contract in the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay, and then do you expect that this bill will increase the number or have any effect on that number?
Yes, I do, because it's brought attention to it. And therefore, it's not unreasonable that the bidders should be aware of this, and it kind of fulfills the intention. But you know, all bidders now. We're going to go ahead in a few minutes and discuss instances where we don't get 3 bids, right? So you know, the conclusion I would reach from that, and we'll go into it a bit more later, is that bidders are having problems bidding. So yes, it's possible it might expand the number, but I don't expect it to expand it hugely. That's your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrne. Thank you, Attorney Brown. Thank you, Madam Chair.
May I just respond also to the question you asked about
Yes,
the history? Where's been brought? We haven't had a history of this kind of preference. We have had a history of a preference for doing business with, and I can't grab it real fast, with nonprofits. And that basically says if you employ handicapped people, then you are due a contract. And I have had lawyers and agency people call me over the last few years about saying that, you know, we had a solicitation, we put it out. These guys came up at the last minute and said that they want the contract because they're entitled to it under that small business, under that nonprofit business rule, because that overrides whether they're responsive or responsible. And that informed my desire to add that amendment to section 5004.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Attorney Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Terlaje. Senator Telena Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question is, what is the, perhaps for the sponsor of the bill, what is the, do you think that it would be more beneficial to, instead of acknowledging disabled veteran-owned businesses, we just state veteran-owned businesses? Madam Chair, that was for the sponsor of the bill.
Okay, Senator Moylan, you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleague. Sure, that could be considered. But we're adding two more categories really to what's already the service disabled. We may have to adjust the original law then if we're considering that too. And what the bill is introducing is just adding two more categories. But sure, I'm sure we can consider your recommendation as well in committee. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The bill isn't just adding two categories, it's repealing the current statute and then reframing it for something else. So I was just thinking, Mr. Byrne, do you see any benefits if we just acknowledge this as a veteran-owned business rather than categorizing it as a disability-owned business or veteran-owned veteran disability-owned business enterprise?
Well, I think Attorney Brown sort of covered that in his earlier answer. We're trying to expand the categories here. Certainly, Senator, anything that simplifies a bill would generally get my support.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Yes, I was asking that question because what Attorney John was stating was very complex and complicated. So I'm thinking, can we just move with something more simplistic? And then everyone across the board would be able to benefit as a veteran. That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Taitague, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank you, Attorney Brown, for your testimony, your 5-page testimony that provided circumstances that could scare any of us about, the potential of fraud. And reading all these cases that you brought to us is concerning. So I think that, before putting something like this together, to try to do our best, and according to Director Byrne, thank you so much for being here to Director Byrne, providing your input with regards to, I think you said that the evidence is by the bidder and that they may provide, but still that evidence needs to be reviewed to see if it's true to form. And so, Mr. Burns, would this mean that, GSA would have more work to do or contracts would take a lot longer to approve because they need to do their due diligence to review these documents to see if it's true to form, even though the evidence is brought to GSA, they still have to verify it. Yeah.
Senator, yes, it would. Prima facie evidence, like you could bring a stock certificate or something to say that you own the business. But as Mr. Brown said, there are complications in that, and it's possible, especially if you set out to commit a fraud, or that you're guided towards a fraud. There are ways in which you could do that, and it would be, first of all, we as I said, we're not equipped. We're not a regulatory body. We're a procurement facility. We don't have investigative people. We could, if we thought that we detected some irregularity, ask the Attorney General to investigate. But that's really something that happens post-award, because we wouldn't want to stop the whole process.
Right.
A procurement is needed because of a procurement. So, but yeah, your simple answer is yes.
Yeah, And it was mentioned too by Attorney Brown that, this money, even the whistleblowers that come out and, bring that to attention that this could be fraudulent, that the money should go back to the government, and not to the whistleblower. I think there is laws in Guam that if you do a whistleblower, a certain percentage goes to that individual who brings it to the forefront, to the authorities. But so, the intent of this legislation is there, but to support it and to provide these regulations to put in place to avoid any kind of fraud as much as we can. Like Attorney Brown said, laws like this do not, stop fraud. People are still going to try and do what they can to make a buck, and whether it's legal or illegal, but we can bring teeth to this. And Mr. Brown or Attorney Brown, where is the teeth in this legislation that if we want to deter them from those who do not, qualify from doing something like this or creating a business for the forefront and really having another bigger company behind you doing all the work. And then that individual, that company who is a disabled vet, actually only receives of $100,000 contract, they only receive 20,000, but the company behind them received more. So what kind of teeth can we put in this legislation?
Well, that's too narrow a focus. The procurement law is got enforcement procedures in it. It's got a disclosure requirement in it. And the disclosure requirement doesn't go quite as deep into ownership tiers. We could, take the example of the federal government, see how they do it and make that part of the disclosure requirement. Also, as far as policing this, you say, well, we don't have, the agencies can't look through all of this stuff and make heads or tails of it. How can we? You don't have to. The guy's competitors are going to know. The procurement process has got a free policing system. It's called a protest. And that can be very, very effective in making those abnormalities brought to light. But also if they can now, in this context, get a false claim connected with this misidentity as eligibility, they're not going to be just trying to have a competitive position. They're going to try to make money off of it. So there are other tools that can and should be brought to bear. We can't turn this bill inside out in order to try to cover everything else that the Procurement Act can help us get to.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Brown. And I also noticed that the federal government too is looking into ways to avoid this type of activity, the fraud that's been going on. I mean, losing hundreds of millions of dollars to this type is alarming, but I think that's important too, that we provide the GSA, the manpower to do this, because but then again, GSA has brought a question that was brought up earlier. How many people have taken advantage of what we have in place right now for veterans? Has it been that many? And according to Director Burns, he's only seen about 2 in the last 2 years. So I think we have room at this point, to create any kind of rules or regulations, or to provide provide GSA with the manpower they need just to cover any kind of contracts. In the meantime, I really appreciate your testimony, Mr. Brown. I'm looking at the areas in which you want to include in section 45004, as well as the comment that you made above, where it says that a major concern is that this bill is framed as an unrestricted mandatory obligation. Okay. I keep putting my head around this, okay, unrestricted mandatory obligation. And then it goes into a section of the bill, notwithstanding a provision, laws, rules, or regulations. You kind of touched on that, and I look forward to working with the committee chair to find out exactly what we can do to strengthen any part of this legislation or provide the means to see it through. Other than that, again, thank you so much. And to Mr. Burns, thank you so much for being here. Greatly appreciate your presence. Thank you, Attorney Brown and Madam Chair. And thank you for the opportunity to ask questions and make comments.
This is Mossy, Senator Taitague. So I did put in the chat, we did pass a law regarding improving disclosure. So that would also include the tiers. So whoever is submitting any kind of bid would have to disclose their level of ownerships at different tiers as well. So perhaps we can take another look at that, see if it needs to be strengthened a little bit more, but we did increase the transparency in that. Okay, so now I would like to recognize the sponsors. My apologies, Senator Moylan, for not offering the floor to you earlier, but you're recognized. If you want to, you have any questions at this time or comments, or would you like to wait till closing?
Madam Chair, you're asking if I wanted to make comments? I'm sorry, I couldn't hardly hear.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're recognized. If you have any questions at this time.
No questions at this time. I'll save my comments for closing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you. Senator Duenas.
Jesus Mossy, Madam Chair, and I would like to once again also join my colleagues in thanking Attorney Brown. He's always, a very much needed resource with regard to bills of this nature under procurement. I don't have any questions, with the exception for maybe Director Byrne. I listened with interest. It sounds like your testimony was that you're in the process of basically revamping or overhauling or reviewing the entire process. If I heard that correctly, can you give me a timeline?
Well, as I said earlier, Senator, I don't have a timeline at the moment. It's the whole regulations, not the whole process. We during the course of this year is one of our goals to review, update, because we have to do that, the rules and regulations of procurement, so to make sure they align with the new legislation that's been passed in the last 18 months, but also to recognize some of these practicalities that I'm talking about, because I'm sure you hear all sorts of stories and sometimes complaints, hopefully sometimes praise for the procurement process that goes on, but it's very labor intensive. So we're looking at trying to make sure that both the bidder and the reviewer understands exactly the process and doesn't just rely upon a few words. But I'm going to talk about, if I may, a little more about this in response to the next bill.
Sounds good, Director Byrne, and yeah, it sounds like then this is timely. And thank you, Attorney Brown, for your recommendations on possible or proposed amendments. Sounds like it will fall in line with what the direction of Department of Administration is currently undertaking anyways, with review to current legislation available as well as passed that have been passed by the legislature. So it sounds like we'll be getting an update from the director soon. So I do agree with Attorney Brown. The protest mechanism is certainly the enforcement and policing generally of this situation, and rightly so. I think the current public auditor mentioned in the past that anything literally over $1 million almost always either gets protested or certainly has a lot of contest in terms of review. So perhaps even under that amount, but I think that that is certainly the rigorous review also that takes place. Competition is a wonderful thing. So for that, Madam Chair, that's all I have at this time. Just Mossy.
All right, thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I fully support the bill. I thank the author for the opportunity to co-sponsor. As you mentioned, we passed a bill earlier in the term to give this type of a positive preferential support to women-owned businesses. And this is another group of individuals that we are here today with the opportunity to support. And I think it's our duty as policymakers in any way to help, especially historically disenfranchised groups, to uplift and empower them to participate in local business and in our government contracts. So I appreciate the opportunity today, especially the contributions of Attorney Brown and Director Byrne for the concerns and the thoughts for us to strengthen this bill and to ensure that we aren't allowing or giving any openings to the potential of fraud in these situations, that we're protecting this process and really helping the individuals that this type of legislation is meant to help. So again, thank you very much. And I look forward to this bill moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Tony Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps maybe Attorney Brown can answer, what is a disability-owned business?
Well, I didn't write this bill, but I presume that they allude to the SBA criteria for a disability-owned business.
Shouldn't it be then a person with disabilities versus a disability-owned business? I mean,
I think
you're the attorney, so legally, I mean, what would be the outcome of either a disability-owned business or a person with disabilities business?
I think when you go through the definitions of take a little bit closer look at it, they do talk about a disabled person, a disabled veteran. And so, yes, it's not that it's a disabled company.
That's what I was looking at. And perhaps maybe, do you think that the title probably should be changed, policy in favor of person with disabilities owned business, or, so that it keeps in line with the person with disabilities rather than the disability owned business?
If you say so, to me, it's not necessary. It's kind of redundant.
Okay, I see. And then, I was looking through the bill, and it seems like we're broadening the scope here, and which is perhaps probably might be advantageous, but maybe something that we can look at, instead of a business being 51% owned by a person with disabilities or a veteran-owned business, whatever, that the business employs 51% with persons of disabilities, person with disabilities, to get a contract at this.
There is another provision, though, that is alluded to, where I found it. It's section 5217. It's procurement from nonprofit corporations. Contract may be awarded for supplier services without competition, this is even more giving than the ones that we're dealing with. I prefer the ones we're dealing with. This old one was a giveaway. But when the contractor is a nonprofit corporation employing sheltered or handicapped persons, so that's what you're talking about. It's an entity that employs handicapped people, and that exists. That's the one that I have had agencies and lawyers call me saying, how do they get in these contracts? They just walk up and say, I want the contract. They haven't even seen our solicitation. They don't know what we need. So that one is just way too loose. And hopefully that one, once we get these others in place, we can just kiss it off. Because I don't know that it doesn't. It does. The difference is, and it could be a critical difference, it applies not to veterans. And all the ones that we're dealing with here have to do with a disabled veteran. This goes beyond veterans. So it has a place, but it's the way it's written, it's just a giveaway.
I see. Okay. That's probably the only questions I had, Madam Chair, at this time. I'll continue to listen as my other colleagues ask their questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Atta. Senator Joanne Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I certainly appreciate the testimony that's been provided. I think it, unfortunately shows the darker side that happens in our community and many other places with regards to interest out there that want to take advantage of benefits that are being provided. And certainly in our case, these are benefits that we're looking at expanding for the government of Guam through its procurement process to provide to interested individuals or companies in our community that may want to provide a service. And I certainly think in moving forward with this bill, I think no one here is going to argue about the desire to want to help those in our community that are disabled, or certainly those that are veterans. But I did want to clarify one question before I had further comment with Senator Moylan in his opening statement with regards to disabled veteran. I don't know if I quite caught that clearly, but I understand we have, veterans that are disabled as a result of injuries that they may have received in service. But I wanted to clarify, were you adding on individuals that are veterans that have since become disabled for other factors? Is that now being included? I just wanted to get that clarified with your opening statement regarding this bill.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be happy to respond to that. Yes, that's correct. To answer your question, yes.
So how do we define that then? Is there a differentiation between those, of course, those that are service connected, receive already special benefits or compensation for disability as a result of what they may have suffered during service? And then, of course, just through the normal process of aging, as we're all experiencing as we're getting older, right? Very few of us escape that reality that, as time goes on, and probably if we all live long enough, we perhaps are all going to fall into the category of disability as a result of different parts of us that probably are not working as well as they used to. So I want to ask, why did you make that differentiation now that you may have an individual who has been a veteran who served, who did not suffer any type of injury or ailment that would qualify them as a service? And I guess we need to clarify that, because it would be referenced as a service-related disability versus an individual who's a veteran and in the course of their life outside of their service, or just as we mentioned, just in the course of aging, become disabled. Why do you feel a need to expand that and yet use the title of veteran? I just wanted to get clarification for that, because I service-related disability is looked at perhaps a little differently and a lot more just because of the fact that these individuals have gone on to serve and perhaps were in the course of their work or certainly, in the course of conflict, they ended up becoming disabled. And that's recognized specifically for a very important reason. Why do you feel a need to expand beyond that?
I'm not certain that it does. This bill basically it modifies section 5012. And that references back to the policy. The policy is in 5011, and it talks about a service disabled veteran. So that says you're disabled during your service.
Yes, I understand that, but in Senator Moylan's opening statement, that's why I just wanted to declare, and he didn't just say that, yes, he is expanding it to a veteran who's since become disabled outside of service. So that's why I was inquiring what was the rationale behind that.
Yeah.
Senator Moylan, are you willing to yield to that question?
Sure. Yes, that's correct, right? I myself am a veteran. I do not have any service disability related to my time in service, but if I do have something later on, I will be able to qualify for this as well. Just one more category adding to what we're adding as disability-owned business in addition. So there's two categories to be added. So
are you specifying, are you going to specify between service-related disability and a veteran with a disability? Because again, you don't even have to be a veteran, obviously, to become disabled. So why do you feel a need to add that on? What makes that a unique category?
It's kind of leaving it out if we don't address it. We're saying you could be a service in the service and have a disability due to your service at the time of being in active duty or reserve status. But if we're not identifying this in addition, then it's we're basically leaving it out. So it was put in honor and respect for veterans to
But
include.
even if you're a veteran or not a veteran and you're disabled, would you still qualify? I'm just wanting to get this clarified because there is I mean, you have those that, and recognizing those that have service-related disabilities, that has its own unique and has had its own unique place because of the fact that, you know, an individual has gone to serve and they've been injured as a result and, you know, essentially inherit perhaps a lifelong challenge as a result of that service-connected disability versus someone that's disabled, veteran or not. Wouldn't they fall under the same category, even if they were a veteran and their disability was not service related? Wouldn't they simply fall in as a disabled individual versus? I'm just trying to get a clarification because I'm a little confused as to why there's a need to do that if the individual, be they a veteran or not, would still qualify as a disabled individual.
Sure, this could probably go into the roles that Mr. Byrne was discussing as well. There could be additional points as a veteran and plus you're disabled versus just able.
Well, and maybe we need to clarify that. Is there going to be more points for a disabled service connected versus just being a veteran? I'm just saying at some point we need to clarify because otherwise we're going to be tripping over each other and wanting to. And I have no argument. I mean, I'm a daughter of a you know, combat veteran who was 100% disabled as a result of injuries suffered during his service in combat. So, you know, I'm very supportive, obviously, of the efforts to support veterans. But I just want to make sure we clarify we're not tripping over each other with regards to how we want to do the definition. But, you know, Attorney Brown, again, I appreciate your continued interest and support of putting your input. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think anyone's argued the intent, but you certainly bring up very good points with regards to ensuring that we have some clear processes in place, especially if somebody signs to pursue servicing the government and providing a good or service, and yet they don't fall into these categories and are trying to take advantage of it. And we see that time and time again. There's many, you know, opportunities that those that are less than credible want to take advantage of our people, and they do it every day in this government. And our government, unfortunately, is very ill-equipped, even ourselves sometimes, in calling people to task when they actually do this type of abuse against our people. Most of us are very shy to even want to acknowledge it. Most of us just want to cover it up, or we simply say nothing and ignore it and, you know, and compliment each other, and it goes on. But I agree with you. I would be supportive of this legislation, but I'd certainly want to see amendments that strengthen to make sure that if a company comes forth and says, yes, we meet this criteria, literally sign your signature on the dot, that they be held accountable. If there is this kind of abuse, that it should be a little more severe, actually. Because you have others out there that probably also qualify, that legitimately are disabled and that certainly could benefit from these opportunities. But you also have those that obviously want to take advantage of it. And those individuals, I think we need to hold higher degree of accountability and probably even a greater penalty if they abuse this and try to take advantage of those in our community by, you know, essentially the sheep, you know, the wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, we should hold a higher degree of accountability for those individuals that try to take advantage of the less, those that are disabled and have many challenges when we're trying to benefit them. I think we need to do something with regards to that, and certainly would want to strengthen the language before we move this bill forward, because I do fear the government structure currently as it's set up is not really equipped to do the level of investigation. And as Attorney Brown, you mentioned, hopefully the competitors will bring it to light, but once it's brought to light, what is the government going to do with it? What are they actually going to do to enforce it and set that example so we don't have the abuse of these type of benefits that we're trying to get out to those that are most in need? With that, Madam Chair, I have no further comment, and thank you for allowing me to ask a question and comment on this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Mary Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Attorney Brown, for your testimony. It was very thorough and certainly an eye-opener to all the considerations that we have to take into account when we're proceeding with this kind of legislation. I especially appreciate the need to make this category consistent with other categories, such as the woman-owned businesses, where it does require 51% of businesses that are owned, operated, and controlled by the qualified applicant. Also, your suggestion on the amendment that would ensure that the responsiveness of the bidder is clearly the criteria. Above all else, it has to be addressed, was most well taken. Director Byrne, I also appreciate, your comments about the need to ensure that that when someone comes in, that there is a way to ascertain whether they in fact qualify under this new provision. Those are the practical sorts of challenges that we have all the time with receiving these applicants. But I just wanted to acknowledge you two that testified. Your efforts and the time that you took are very well taken and very much appreciated. And I will continue to work with the main sponsor to sharpen this bill and to take all those considerations into account so that we can amend it properly so that it satisfies all the interests that were expressed today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Torres. So we did receive testimony by Chief Procurement Officer, Ms. Akfaji, and so she had some questions that I would like to maybe read into the record and maybe get a response by those that are here testifying. So as to Bill 235, in Section 5012A3, she asked, please define what substantially limits one or more major life activities. So that's one question. Perhaps if I can get a response by either Director Byrne or Attorney Brown, if they know what that definition entails.
I just would like to point out that the language in this bill is taken verbatim, the description of the categories specifically is taken verbatim from the SBA rules. And I think if there was a provision added that says that this was intended to be consistent with the SBA guidance on these matters, it would eliminate the question that Senator Brown had about whether this applies to any veteran who at any time becomes disabled. Because there are a lot of regulations in the SBA that define those nice questions. What do you mean by disabled? What does that entail? What degree of it? Did you stub your toe? Does that count, or you lost an arm? Those are silly questions to ask rationally, but people will ask those just to try to undo the system. And the SBA takes the time and spells it out.
Okay, and the same goes for third-party certification, self-certification affidavit. So that's all outlined in the federal guidelines as well.
I can't speak as a complete expert on that, but I'm just saying that and I didn't have that much time to actually go through the bill fine tooth comb, but it does follow the language that I have read and the SBA decisions that I've seen that percolated up as procurement questions. And I think that we can trust that process better than we can trust our own instincts to just make up something. Because, the courts, when they look at something, they said, if this was taken from a model in another state, has no jurisdiction over us, we will still be guided by that to the extent that it seems reasonable for us to accept that. So we have in a model, identifying that model and say we intend to try to follow this model unless we explicitly change it. That gives us something that, I said before, has years of experience behind it already. And we'll be there going forward.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Brown. Senator Camacho, Senator Torres, did you want to add to that comment?
I was just noting in the chat that the ADA regulations do provide a non-exhaustive list of examples of major life activities. And they are, there are several: caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing or hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, everything, communicating or interacting with others and working. So so ADA does have guidance. And then there's also ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act regulations that define what physical or mental impairment is as well. So I was just noting in the chat that when there are references to these types of, when there are references to these conditions that they are in fact established already, and that the ADA is one body that we can refer to. And I can also send a link to it in the chat as well if anyone wants to look it up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Torres. So I would like to now recognize the sponsor of the bill to provide his any questions and closing remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Byrne and Attorney Brown, thank you very much for your opening and your comments and your recommendations. I appreciate your support for the measure as you started your conversations in support of the bill and how we can strengthen this bill to identify the problems that you have seen in the current law. And so that's very helpful. And obviously we can easily add to strengthen this bill to move it forward rather than putting it on the back burner. These questions can be answered, and Mr. Brown, that was pretty good on, it refers to SBA guidance, and we can preference that into the bill in committee to strengthen this. Mr. Byrne, we're looking forward to the rules and regs there coming along. I know you have your priorities, and I'm sure we can work this bill in at the same time rather than delay any process. And I'm sure we can do the right thing. After all, it's supporting small businesses and helping those with disabilities, and especially the honest ones that we're most concerned with to assist. So I thank you for your comments and recommendations, and thank you, colleagues, as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Moylan. So being that there are no other testimonies or questions on Bill 235-36, this bill is now duly heard. So we will move on to the next item of the agenda, which is Bill number 236-36 COR, sponsored by myself, Senator Sabina, Flores, Perez, co-sponsored by Speaker Therese, Terlaje, Senators Joanne Brown, Telena Nelson, James Moylan, Joseph Agustin, Clynton Ridgell, and Telo Taitague. It's an act to amend Section 5213 of Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to strengthening the requirements of small purchases. So Bill 236-36 aims to increase accountability and transparency in the procurement of small purchases by the government of Guam. Current statute sets small purchase thresholds at $25,000 for supplies and services and $100,000 for construction. It requires that procurement shall not be artificially divided in order to not exceed these thresholds, and that the Chief Procurement Officer, Director of Department of Public Works, and the head of a purchasing agency send monthly reports to the legislature regarding small purchases exceeding $15,000 for supplies and services and those exceeding $50,000 for construction. Bill 236 aims to reform current statute by the following: that all efforts are made to increase competition by requiring 3 positive quotes from qualified sources in which a no quote quotation shall not qualify as a positive quote. To require that if 3 positive quotes are not obtained, the procuring officer shall attest to it and that the attestation be included in the procurement record, and to expand reporting requirements to any procurement officer in the government of Guam. In 2004, the OPA reported several findings regarding small purchases. During a 21-month period from October 1st, 2001 to June 30th, 2003, small purchases accounted for 95% of the 10,000 purchase orders valued at $25 million. Evidence indicated at the time that multiple purchases were possibly artificially divided to pose as small purchases in an attempt to circumvent procurement regulations by not obtaining 3 telephonic or written quotations for purchases of $500 or less, or obtaining competitive sealed bids for purchases above $15,000. In effect, over time, such practices resulted in large purchases that should have required competitive sealed bidding. Evidence was also found at the time of possible preferential selection of vendors, with the top 20 vendors receiving $4.9 million in FY 2002 alone. Some of the recommendations to GSA were to cease the issuance of multiple POs to the same vendor in one day and ensure that purchases are publicized and competitively bid, and that GSA should assist agencies in identifying and developing a list of recurring goods and services needed to operate the agency throughout the year. such as office and computer supplies, medical supplies, food and medical supplies for Department of Corrections, and obtain at least 3 written quotations and maintain a complete procurement record. GSA Procurement Officer and the Department of Administration Director generally concurred with the findings and recommendations. In 2020, the Office of the Public Accountability press release highlighted that only 3 of the government agencies submitted monthly reports regarding small purchases to the legislature as required by law. And since the 2003 audit, the current influx of federal pandemic relief money warrants greater transparency and attention on practices of small purchases with the intention of fostering competition through positive quotations, ensuring that small purchases are not artificially subdivided to meet the threshold limits. And those cases require the use of competitive bidding for large purchases in order to ultimately obtain the best value in the expenditure of vital public funds. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Speaker Terlaje, Senators Joanne Brown, Telena Nelson, Jim Moylan, Joseph Agustin, Clynton Ridgell, and Telo Taitague, and I look forward to ensuing dialogue and testimony to improve transparency with small purchases, to protect the public interest and support resiliency and sustainability of our island. So I would like to now invite Director Byrne for his testimony or comments.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and thank you for the opportunity to address this subject, which I think is very important. Procurement is the areas where within the administration and in autonomous agencies also, there is a fair amount of I can only call it frustration in actually fulfilling the need of that agency through the procurement process. There are a number of reasons I surmise for this. One is the economic conditions. We're in the middle of a pandemic where fast action and needs arise more quickly, they're more emergent, and they're possibly totally unforeseen because of the pandemic conditions that we're in. That also has kind of destabilized economic conditions. And I think we've all seen some increase in wholesale and retail prices as a result of, and again, I can only surmise that we're learning how to manage this pandemic. We're learning how to, I recently came back from being in California over the Christmas break. And if you go down towards the coast there, you can see these lines of ships waiting out in the channel, waiting to get into the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. So we're learning how to deal with these economic conditions, but I don't think we fully learned how to deal with them. These affect delivery schedules, and delivery schedules are an important part of a procurement process. You can get the cheapest price, but if you don't get the cheapest price, if you get the cheapest price, but you don't get delivery for several months, you can see that frustration will very quickly build up. So, the ultimate answer to making sure there is enough competition is to encourage the competition. I'm very mindful of this. We want to make sure that bidders expect and will be treated with complete equality when they submit their bids, that the bids are responsive to the bid specifications, and the bid specifications themselves are well written, are clear, and are professional. So the Procurement Policy Office, of which I am chairman, is looking at these things, and as I alluded to earlier, we're going to have a look at the regulations in order to stimulate competition. Because if there's any suspicion that the system isn't working, the best way to deal with it, and I understand the need for regulation and reporting, but in practice, and as you can see, I'm concerned with practice in particular. In practice, the best way to ensure competition is to stimulate it. So this bill imposes additional reporting requirements. I think I understand what the impetus behind that is, and we will certainly report as thoroughly and as frequently as the legislature feels comfortable. But if we don't get three positive quotes is sometimes an impossible thing to achieve. We don't always know the reason for it, because when you ask a vendor why they didn't respond, very often they don't respond to that question either. And it's probably not in their interest to do so. So we're kind of stuck, and that's why I'm advocating as much as possible that we stimulate competition. We on our part have done our best. We've reduced the payment period from very often very extended or unknown payment periods to we've undertook to make payments within 30 days, and we've told vendors that. So the issue of uncertainty of timing of payment no longer exists. That was one of the reasons why bidders were reluctant to bid. But we've removed that reason. Maybe they need more reassurance, and hopefully these words and other words that we've been trying to, I wrote to them, but these words before this committee may help to persuade the vendors or potential vendors that that's the case. So we certainly have no reason to oppose this bill. We will support it, but underlying all this, I really feel that and I've spent most of my career in private business. I really feel that stimulation of competition is the answer, and removal of any barriers that may exist in corporate minds as to why they are reluctant to bid for government contracts. Lack of clarity, lack of payments, I've just addressed. Lack of response sometimes, frustration. I see the frustration in myself when you say a bid is going to close on a certain day. You're a vendor who has prepared everything to be able to submit a bid on that day, and then for whatever reason that response period gets extended. There might be cost associated with that. There is certain uncertainty associated with that. So we're going to do everything we can to make it easier to bid, but still maintain, obviously, the proprieties of complete competition.
All right, Director Byrne, does that conclude your testimony?
I think so. I've used a lot of words there.
All right, thank you.
But I'm open to questions, of course.
All right, thank you. We'll come back around for questions. Attorney Brown, thank you for being here, and we do again appreciate all your presence and your input on procurement. So, yeah, so we definitely would like to hear your feedback on this bill. The floor is yours.
I would like to give it to you, but I seem to have lost my copy of my testimony. And I've been, as Byrne was discussing it, I thought I would have enough time to recover it, and haven't yet done that. Small purchases. Oh, shoot. Okay, yeah, got it. Madam Chair, committee members, sponsors, and others, this bill requires an attestation, but as to what? Original bill doesn't say. But before going there, let me point out some confusion in the existing regulations that purport to broaden the intent and meaning of section 50 GCA, 5 GCA 5213 short description of this particular method of source selection. It's a short paragraph about small, basically puts it into the hands of the policy office, and fortunately we actually have one now. It can keep up with it. Article 3 of the Procurement Act identifies the exclusive procedural means by which supplies, services, construction might be acquired by the territory. That's the list of all of the methods of source selection. It says, unless otherwise provided by law, all territorial contracts shall be awarded by competitive bidding, except for the procurement of professional services and except as provided in section 5213 of this article. 5213 is small purchases. Okay, so I've selected that one article because except as provided in other sections as well as 5213. On the authority of 5213, regulations were adopted soon after the original comprehensive procurement law was enacted by Public Law 16-124, which became law on December 30th, 1982 and effective on 1983. So we've been operating with those regulations, or that law, I should say, and then the regulations that came later in, I think it was 84. The regulations have not kept pace with the developments in the law, and in the case of small purchases under 5213, there was a bit of confusion from the get-go. In addition to the small purchase method of source selection, 16124 also authorized sole source procurement as a separate method. The regulations muddy that fairly clear dichotomy. 2 GAR 3111 lays out a means of acquisition for supply, service, and construction for prices below a threshold amount determined by law. And it has a teeny-weeny provision also for supplies and services under $500, which doesn't need a regulation because it gives the CPO the power to adopt operational procedures. Operational procedures don't rise to the level of regulations. And that shall provide for obtaining adequate and reasonable competition and for making records to property account for funds and to facilitate auditing of the purchasing agency. That's exactly what Mr. Byrne was talking about. His priority is promoting competition. And I think there was a subplot also that he made, we need to be able to account for all the funds, even if it's $500, and facilitate auditing. So between that small purchasing ability under $500, between the method for acquiring wee little purchases and small purchase, there's a threshold set recently, as the chair told us, has increased the amount that qualifies as the small purchase, above which it is no longer a qualified small purchase. It says that 5111, as it reads now, says the method of source selection built on a simple request for quotations, RFQs, insofar as it is practical. So it's a regulation without a backstop. A request for quotations is so far as is practical, and no less than 3 positive written quotations shall be solicited, recorded, and placed in the procurement file. Okay, so what we're dealing with, and as the regulation exists now, is that on this question of positive written quotations, well, first of all, they have to be solicited, and then they have to be recorded, and then they have to be placed in the procurement file. So we have a pretty good record there that we can kind of sift through to find out if competition is actually being solicited. promoted. But the bill doesn't say that. It says that just give us an attestation of something. And so I think what they've been doing so far is just keeping copies of the quotations. That doesn't tell you how they're going about getting competition, particularly if they don't have 3 quotations, 3 positive ones. You need as well to know who did you solicit? And that's not being done. You need to make sure that that is happening. And you need to know what was the reason that particular one was accepted. Because the small purchases also say that they shall be awarded to the lowest quote, lowest quotation from a responsible offeror. But we don't have that information. So there's no way that we have the procurement, the auditing trail that the Section 5111 contemplates. So let's now back up and put this in a context that is quite important and is too often overlooked. This is the very first section in the procurement law. It says, it's entitled Purposes and Rules of Construction. First subsection A says interpretation. This chapter shall be construed, that is interpreted, and applied to the facts to promote its underlying purposes and policies. So you don't just take the language as it boldly appears in either the regulation of the law without interpreting it and applying it through these lenses. The underlying purposes and policies of this chapter include to maximize to the fullest extent practicable the purchasing value of public funds, which means you get the lowest price you can. And secondary, another such, I call them principles, but they call it purposes and policies, is to foster effective broad-based competition. Now, foster is a verb. It requires action. You have to step up to the plate and do those things that may be a little bit difficult to do, but that gets you the competition. It has to be effective competition. Foster effective competition is one of the main pillars of the procurement mantra in the United States. Does not foster effective competition to keep track only those that were positively responded without knowing more about the context, such as who was solicited, how much time was given to the offerors to consider and give a quote. Is there a list of vendors or service providers who have taken part in the past, and has there been an inquiry as to why they did not this time? You know, there are provisions in the law to come up with qualified bidders lists and qualified product lists so that you know that they're there, you know that there's a market for it. We're supposed to be doing market research and planning for our procurement. We don't. We just don't. If you look at the federal system, they have whole separate regulations, FARs, for procurement planning and procurement market research. We don't. We have one law that says that that in the event of an emergency, you can take a lower price. You should take a lower price normally. You can take a lower delivery time ahead of the price, but only if it's within 5% of the next highest bid. So, or next delayed bid. So there is a policy that tells us about how we can make delivery more important than price in certain circumstances, very extreme circumstances. And also note that, as has been mentioned by others, that it's to the agency's best interest to have only one positive quote, or none even. And that is a result of finagling the regulations a long time ago. Regulations can't contradict the law. But this regulation, 31111, says that in the event there is only one business available, the sole source method shall be used, even if the procurement is a small purchase. So it allows a sole source when you don't acknowledge quotes and using your discretion to attest to something that may have prevented it. And the most frequent one is in this context of you got to have it now. Well, why do you have to have it now? Lots of times it's because your contract, your existing contract for those goods or services has expired and you didn't see it coming. Well, you got to know that you need it now. It sounds like an emergency. The emergency law says it is not an emergency if it could have been foreseen by reasonable, prudent management. So that would eliminate having a contract expire that you didn't know about. Management has to keep track of those things. So the sole source law requires that only a sole source procurement have separately from small purchases that there's a written determination from the head of an agency. There are separate determinations that have to be made for sole sources that aren't to the ones that are made for small purchases. So you suddenly switch from a small purchase and its requirements to a sole source and its requirements, and the determinations that are required are a little bit more tight. And the sole source also says that any request by using agency that a procurement be restricted to one potential contractor shall be accompanied by an explanation as to why no other will be suitable. We don't get that determination when we decide that we didn't get enough quotes. And so I'm going to pick one, and here's my attestation. You don't address how do you consider this a sole source to begin with? And that has to be done. But the law as written says, well, you can just switch to that, but without leaving the sole source requirements, without leaving the small purchase requirements. There's no seamless transition from small purchasing to sole source purchasing, but we act like there is. And the distinguishing character of sole source, small purchases procurement as compared to all other sources is that it has a threshold, a dollar threshold, as we've already talked about. Well, it turns out that that's exactly the same threshold that is used for a blanket purchase agreement. But the regulations by category include blanket purchase agreements as a sole source, because the blanket purchase, the sole source provisions are in 3112 of the regulations, and the blanket purchase agreement, which is a small purchase because by definition of its dollar limitation, follows right behind sole source in 3112.1. So they lump them together, but the BPA is really a characteristic of small purchases and should be considered a separate means of doing it. If you don't know what a blanket purchase agreement is, it's fundamentally a charge account. And agencies can authorize people to go acquire goods and services from those approved charge accounts. And there are a lot of other limitations to them, but that's what it is. But it is certainly not something that the law ever anticipated. I don't say that it's illegal because it was done by regulation when the law didn't specifically require it. to the extent the law did when it said that you're limited to this dollar threshold, and we are putting BPAs in this dollar threshold, which they don't do with small purchases. Sorry, I'm getting confused again with sole source purchases. So there's, as you can see, I kind of get confused with things that come out of my mouth when I'm trying to say something else in this field. It's hard to get your mind wrapped around and keep it wrapped around it and keep it in order. So looking at the choice of a single quotation because you didn't get 3 positive quotations is turning it into an emergency, particularly if you haven't solicited them properly. You know, it says that you have to solicit these small purchases. If you call 3 people who you know aren't going to give you one, and then another one who does, you've contrived. And I think Mr. Byrne was saying very clearly that that's not what we want to do. We want to encourage competition. And there's so much about this provision, small purchases, that can be easily manipulated to avoid competition rather than promote it. Okay, I'm just repeating again, underscoring how much foster competition is a basic part in the first section of our procurement law. It requires that we do that. You can't, the schmoozing of the bill by saying, well, you can do by small sole sourcing, or you can do it by emergency. Those come with even more strict requirements, procedural requirements than the small purchases. But if you do it as a small purchases, you just ignore those strict requirements for those other methods of source selection. The public auditor has stated that small purchase procurements is piecemeal, uncomplicated, and convenient, and limits competition, stifles fairness, is inherently inefficient and costly, and does not, we'll just get rid of this, does not require the advertisement, small purchases. And requiring only 3 price quotes from vendors, small purchase procurement closes the door to those vendors not selected or who may offer better products and services. Again, this is the report of the public auditor back in Doris's day, 2015, I think it was. GSA routinely decides, and not the agencies, which 3 vendors to solicit. This adds further to the speculation of who you know in government in order to do business. Small purchase procurement leaves the wider vendor market untapped. In order to obtain the best possible price, GovGuam should procure recurring goods or services through advertised competitive sealed bidding process, i.e. indefinite quantity and indefinite amount bids instead of using serial small purchase authority. Small purchase requirement requires the solicitation of no less than 3 price quotes, which inherently limits competition to other vendors who may wish to participate and could offer a better price. Small purchase procurement also stifles fairness, and requiring only 3 quotes, GSA may lead to expediency and limit itself only to the first 3 vendors they prefer. So this is in the performance audits reports from the OPA, GSA small purchase requirements in covering the period between 2010 and 2011. So the same problem has been with us. We haven't made it any one whit better than what was decried back then in that report. All of these various procurement methods that are used in lieu of small purchases don't facilitate audit trails. They don't inhibit abuse. They don't inspire commercial competitive spirits, and they reduce the demands on a finite labor force. The manpower for processing 4 or 5 serial small purchases has got to be greater than having one proper small purchase and leave it at that. So you can avoid some labor costs, administrative costs. It can be as simple as requiring the Director of Administration to come up with a list of prospective suppliers and qualified products. See 2 GAR 3117, which talks about that. The things that you can and should do. You have that information at your fingertips. Even when you are rushed to get something done, if you have a list of proven products or suppliers that you can turn to, you should do that first. The federal government does that. It requires all contractors, vendors to register under a registry that tells the kind of things that they provide. We don't. We make every agency discover that on their own or not, just give way to convenience or sleight of the hand. The CPO should be able to garner that information from and share it with the agencies of the whole of government, because it is the CPO's duty, responsibility, and management role to serve as the central procurement officer of the territory with respect to supplies and services, and to procure or supervise the procurement of all supplies and services needed by the territory, and to exercise general supervision and control over all supplies belonging to the territory. If the CPO is exercising those responsibilities, the CPO would have this information because it's from every agency in the territory. I think it would be a dereliction of management responsibility to ignore that. And similarly, the Director of Public Works has similar duties and responsibilities over construction for the whole territory. Those duties and responsibilities are mentioned in 5 GCA section 5113. If more time was spent on pulling that information together, perhaps less time would need to be spent processing small purchases. If more resources are needed to implement the information system necessary, the legislature should itself make that a priority rather than simply declare a no quote quotation will not be considered a positive quotation. That is no fix. Being able to say, well, we don't have a positive quotation, well, we're going to consider a no quote as a positive quotation. If it's no quote, how can it, what have you got? You don't have anything. You have to start over again, but you don't. You go find one that you know will give it to you and you go for it. And that's just the kind of sleight of hand, it's kind of fraud that we were talking about under the services preference. And we need to find other ways of doing it besides just saying, well, you can go for 3 quotes, but if you get no quotes, you haven't gotten a quote. It doesn't count. It doesn't make your situation any better. The idea is, again, as Mr. Burns said so succinctly, we need to create competition. And again, this commentary was jammed together real fast yesterday. It may not be the best put, because when you have little time, you make it long. When you have a lot of time, you make it short. I had little time for this, but that has been submitted as of yesterday afternoon, and it will be available for your review if you want. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Attorney Brown, for your recommendations. We have been actually adjusting the bill to include your recommendations. I do believe, yes. So one of the problems that the audit, like as you mentioned, was that the serial use of small purchases can actually lead to larger purchases. And in those cases, the IDIQ might be the preferred method. Doing more competitive sealed bidding would be the preferred method to get the best value. Yeah, and really, in fact, the rationale behind this bill was brought on by some business people that felt that perhaps there might be preferential treatment, and that would limit competition. So definitely, the intent was to expand, bring more transparency into this process. And so, definitely appreciate your thoughts regarding how a small purchase can turn into a sole source, which that's yeah, we don't definitely want to go there, or to emergency, right? So more definitely we want to push it in the direction of a competitive sealed bid. And I think part of the issue is planned procurement. So agencies know ahead of time what they've been purchasing throughout the year, and perhaps they should work towards developing those solicitations, which can definitely go beyond the thresholds of 25,000 for supplies and services. As the OPA audit mentioned, the total amount was in the millions of dollars. So the small purchase amounts were in the millions, when in fact, it was only meant to apply to those that were below the thresholds. So yeah, there definitely is a need for reform here. And I do appreciate the comments regarding attestation, tightening that language to require that, more information be put in the record regarding, who approached us, right, in response to the bids or the the RFQs. Yeah, and I think also, eventually automation will help address some of these issues, just like in the federal government. Things can be placed on a website, and businesses can register. So that would help address some of the lack of publicity when it comes to these small purchases. So yeah, we will take your recommendations as well as Director Burns' recommendations into address in strengthening this bill. Yeah, one of the issues too is qualified sources. So that doesn't appear in the small, to my knowledge, it didn't appear in statute. And so that was one of the additions we had in this bill to require that. But I don't have any questions. I do agree with a lot of the recommendations that you provided, to make sure that we're constantly, improving procurement, by looking at basically consolidating our purchases so that we can go to competitive bidding, as well as doing the market research to show that, perhaps there are other considerations. For instance, the supply chain, right? That's one of the big issues today is, the supply chain issues. So, what can we do to overcome that without having going towards emergency procurement or sole source, right? So there are definitely some proactive measures that can be done. I don't have any questions at this time, so I'm going to open it up to my colleagues. Speaker Terlaje, if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say I am very appreciative of the testimony, and it seems like we all have the same concerns. It's just how do we finesse this. So the Attorney Brown's statements regarding attestation, I agree with. I think we can be very specific as to what is required there so that we continue to promote competition and best value for the government. I guess I just want to ask, so if 3 quotes are not obtained, do both of you agree that if only 1 quote is obtained, we should switch to sole source procurement? It should be treated then as a sole source procurement? No, if there's only 1 quote obtained?
if you do, they have to meet the sole source procurement requirements, which require a different kind of determination. And it will fall under that. Now, that's the only that would be my condition on switching to a sole source.
Right. So yeah, because then it'd be more stringent because there's only one source. But if we don't switch to sole source and use those more restrictive terms, then it would continue to fall under this small purchase.
Not get done. Correct.
Right. Okay. And what if there are only 2 quotes? Is that a problem?
At least you have some competition there, or facial.
Yeah. 2 quotes with an attestation as to why we couldn't get any additional quotes might be reasonable. Mr. Byrne, what do you think about that? If there's only 1 quote, switching to the more stringent sole source rules, and is it all right if there are 2 quotes plus an attestation that would promote competition?
I think, I hope that what I said earlier emphasize the need to get the procurement done, right? You're right. I mean, basically, though, if you only have 1 quote, in effect, that is sole source. So, if it's determined that the appropriate plan of action thereafter is to go down the path of the more stringent requirements, which you just referred to, I think that's okay and appropriate, but we must recognize that might delay a procurement. And if I may, at this point, Attorney Brown talked about planned procurement, and I'm all for that. But I think we all have to recognize that unplanned things do happen, and unplanned things in this particular, past 18 months have happened. And that has actually been one of the big challenges for GSA and the other agencies, is dealing with these totally unknown things that have arisen over the last few months. But generally, yes. The answer to your question was generally yes, but we need to do whatever we can and take whatever actions we can to make sure that doesn't represent an undue delay.
Yeah, I hear you about the delay. I can see how this would result, switching at that point to sole source may result in a delay or likely take a longer time. But do you both believe that these, and it's kind of outside the bill, but the amounts are still okay? Or that we are seeing with these amounts, or I don't know, well, let me rephrase that. So with any amount, there's a very specific language in here that says that the procurement should not be broken up just so that they can meet this small purchase requirement. How do you think this bill would help us to prevent that, Mr. Byrne? Or is there another better way to prevent that?
Again, although this is an incipient problem, I don't know that, it has happened. And we have had in the single audit, which only covers federal purchases, but it has highlighted some instances where the auditors felt that had happened, but they weren't numerous.
Okay.
They were a couple of really specific ones. Other than that, you'd have to go through almost every procurement and try and associate it with a subsequent or prior procurement, and that's that's a pretty onerous thing to do. Mr. Brown did talk about the proliferation of purchase orders may increase this tendency, and I would agree with that. And I do agree the proliferation of purchase orders is not a good thing. but the practicalities may, of actually eliminating may be more difficult.
All right. Thank you both. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Speaker. Senator Taitague, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, well, first, thank you again, Mr. Burns, for being here. And of course, Attorney Brown, for your thorough testimony. In fact, I was trying to follow along in your testimony, but it looked like you had provided a testimony back in, earlier January 10th and then January 17th. So trying to put these two together and extract what your comments and suggestions are. However, during the time I was reviewing this bill, I did notice that what had happened, how that amount of 15,000 to 30,000 for supplies and 50,000 to 100,000 for construction was a bill that was actually introduced by Senator Morrison, actually first by Senator Tom Atta. Unfortunately, it was toward the end of the term and was not signed into law. It basically died, and then Senator Tommy Morrison introduced Bill 49-34. And it was then that it was signed into law. However, there was an amendment made to that, not incorporating the GAR, claiming that based on, the reasoning for not including GAR to incorporate the corresponding changes in the bill that became Public Law 34-137 was that the administration has the authority to do so, to proceed with the Administrative Adjudication Act to make the changes to GAR, but it was never done. So I'm hoping, Madam Chair, that in this legislation, I think you might have brought this up earlier too. It's been a long discussion today and trying to incorporate everything that was said, but that we incorporate that into the legislation to coincide with not the Guam Code, not just the Guam Code annotated, but also GAR to incorporate these changes. So looking at that, most of the questions were asked, and based on your testimony too, the concerns was brought up by Speaker is also good. We don't want to, we can see a delay, a huge delay, and especially on projects that need to be done right away, and knowing that on a health perspective, that's very important and can be very critical when it comes to health issues on procurement. However, it was mentioned earlier, Mr. Burns, that you said that because of the pandemic, when you first talked about it, that you might have procurement policies or protocols in place because of this pandemic. Has that been submitted to agencies or provided? Have you created that document that you mentioned earlier of guidelines?
I think it comes the other way. I think it comes the other way around, Senator. Is that agencies need to establish what it is that they think they need, or what and react to changing conditions. And some of them, to be fair, have done this pretty well. Some of them haven't. Yes, I agree that planned procurement is an absolutely laudable goal, and no organization should reject the notion of having planned procurement. Frankly, most of the organizations I've been in have not succeeded in achieving much of that. I've been in, and if I can just say, I've been in groups of companies where there has been an attempt to centralize purchasing, and it's pulled in information from a whole lot of subsidiaries or worldwide operations, and sorting that out and actually producing something that's useful out of it was very rare. Usually the result was, well, there was some attempt at a rebate based on volume. but that doesn't apply here. So the results of that kind of activity, we need to look at, and we need to plan, and we need to establish protocols that are going to work in our particular circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Mr. Byrne, what penalties are imposed on agencies or responsible authorities for violations of small purchase policy?
Senator, I don't approve of penalties. Penalties don't really do much. I approve of encouragement, so, penalties are something that happens afterwards. Encouragement is something that happens first, and that's where I would start. It doesn't help, the government to have a penalty, right? Government has to move forward.
So in other words, there are no penalties that are imposed on agencies, or you don't know of any penalties?
Well, the practical penalty is if they take a misstep, they don't get the procurement that they plan to get. But very often it's we're a government, we service the people, and we don't want to. We're really good sometimes at punishing the wrong people. That's something I tell my staff all the time, don't punish the wrong people. It's counterproductive.
Okay, well, I'm sure that conversation can go into another public hearing, like an oversight, because I'd really like to know what happens to individuals or, agents, procurement agents who are under GSA that don't follow the guidelines and rules and regulations or provide the information needed, especially when it comes to small procurements like this that can actually later on become millions of dollars, and nothing happens to them. A slap on the wrist or what? That's what I'm concerned about too moving forward. So I'll save the remaining questions with regards to that same subject matter for an oversight maybe. But again, appreciate Mr. Brown, again, your testimony. I'll go through it again thoroughly and look at and work with the committee chair. I hope that I can contact you if I have any questions. I've actually sent you a text message over the weekend on something else, but you haven't looked at your WhatsApp app. But again, thank you so much for your time and energy that you put into this, and making a difference. Attorney
I'd like
Brown.
to comment on a couple of things that have been talked about. Starting with you kind of piqued my pet peeve. You were talking about the legislature failed to put something into the regulations. You've got it all wrong. You don't have the authority to do that. That's a separation of power issues. This legislature constantly wants to pass regulations. They don't have the authority to do that. Only the executive can make a regulation. Mr. Byrne, for instance. Then the legislature will approve or disapprove of those proposed regulations.
You're talking about the AAA process, correct, Mr. Attorney Brown? Talking about the AAA process?
The AAA says that if an agency wants to do regulations, make a regulation, this is how they do it. An agency, not a Senate, not our legislature.
So, Mr. Burns, I understand your frustration on that, but what happens when legislation is passed, and this was passed in, I believe, 2018, a while ago, and it's still, the agency hasn't come forward with creating going through the AAA process?
Not necessary. The Supreme Court has said that if the regulations differ from the law prevails, case closed. So as soon as you write a law that's inconsistent with a regulation, the law applies. That regulation becomes null and void. So that's not an issue.
Okay, so the law prevails. The Guam Code Annotated will prevail over any GAR incorporation of any GAR, correct?
Any inconsistent.
That's inconsistent.
Yes.
So you follow the law. The precedent is to follow the law.
Exactly.
Okay, but it would be nice to have everything in order so it's clear and precise. When you go to judges and they try to figure out what the intent was, they look back at documents and for instance, in this case, if the intent was this and the law was passed with regarding, three submittals of quotes coming in, and they go to GAR and nothing's in the GAR, it would be nice to make it clear and precise that both the GAR and Guam Code Annotated are meshed together as one, and it's a clear understanding as to what the law was intended. Wouldn't that?
Holding that out, because they say the courts say the first thing you look at is the plain language, the law, not the intent behind it. You look at what they said, not at what a senator said on the floor about it or anything else. You looked at what they said, and then you make plain, practical interpretation of that language. So even so, I just don't go there. They don't mix. It's oil and water, regulations and law. And I'd also like to just make a comment on writing law that is informed by recent unprecedented history. The epidemic requiring a complete breakdown of supply chains, delivery tables, and all that sort of thing. We make a law about this and that doesn't happen. That law is going to interrupt other things probably. It's been fascinating to me to see, as a contract lawyer, that you've all heard of force majeure. It's a boilerplate clause that says if something comes along that none of us anticipated, it's not a breach to ignore that or to walk away from it. You can't be damaged if there's a force majeure defense. Force majeure is something out of the blue. And I get a lot of publications that send me current legal opinions and that sort of thing. The number of those sites to force majeure on the outbreak of this pandemic around the world, not just in America, around the world just took off. But a force majeure is a unique event. It's not going to be repeated, but and looking at a possible solution to some of the things that we've had because of the pandemic, we can take a hint from some of that force majeure stuff. You're let off the hook, and nobody bears that because nobody saw it coming.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. And as far as reading with the law versus the intent, that's argumentative too, because, if the law can be, there's loopholes into it, it's usually the judge looks into the intent. So, but then again, you're an attorney, I'm not, I just hear from other attorneys what they say about it, but I greatly appreciate, and I do definitely respect your comments that you make here. You've been under this type of subject for many, many years and even teach it at GCC. So what you have to say carries a great respect, and definitely will go over your testimony again. And thank you again, Mr. Burns, for your assistance. Madam Chair, appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Taitague. So I'd like to recognize Jarek Hernandez from the Office of the Public Auditor. Thank you for joining us today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator, and good afternoon, the rest of the board. So I've been sort of listening in every now and then, and so I just wanted to add some comments to the testimony that was already given. And so the main points when it comes to the audit findings, particularly with the last one that was recognized, it was linked to a proper planned procurement. When we look at the procurement itself as the auditor, we saw commonalities, things that are really commonly purchased every year. And so in that regard, that's where we're saying with those things, yes, you should do more competitive bid indefinite quantity, definite amount. But small purchase can be used for certain things. But the point, and we agree with the intent of the law to provide, or the bill, sorry, to provide more accountability and transparency, because what we're seeing when we review these procurement records is the lack of the procurement record. So in instances, you can do small purchase and have let's say there's indication that you went out for 5 vendors and only 3 vendors came back. So there's some trail to show there was an attempt by the agency to get X number of vendors. So talking about what Mr. Byrne was saying with regards to competition, if the record shows that there was an attempt to get competition, then of course, then it should suffice that sometimes they try to get the quotes, but only 2 out of 10 came back. And so there was an attempt by the agency to do so. And so in that regard, the fact that in the end result, they only had 2 positive quotes and 1 no quote, then to me, that should have sufficed for the end result being awarded to 1 vendor. But there was an attempt to show you tried to get X number of vendors to give a quote. And so there's that distinction between that versus you go out and you just get 3 quotes and only 1 positive quote came back. And so I just wanted to add that sort of discussion in that there's some distinction where there's no, in the procurement record itself, where there's showing there was an attempt, at least from the agency, to get competition. And if that can be addressed generally, I think that would help with the small purchase procurement, because at least there's a record showing there was an attempt to get the quotes. And but I do sort of agree with what Mr. Byrne's saying, is we don't want to try and minimize competition. And especially when the agencies are needing these items, right away, you definitely don't want to hinder the process as well. So it's like finding that balance, but also adding to the accountability, transparency of the process. So that's just what I wanted to add regarding the distinction between getting quotes.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Yes, I do recall Chief Procurement Officer saying that she would require that some of the agencies go out, get more quotes. So even if they got 3, she would ask them to get more quotes. Yeah.
But that should be like across the board. It should be practice, because what we're seeing is there's some distinction where sometimes there's only 3 quotes for 1 item or 1 procurement, whereas in this one they had like 10. So it does leave way for that discretion. I think that a lot of people are concerned about is kind of like soliciting, getting quotes from who you know, but also getting quotes for who you know won't give a quote. And then you're therefore have the documentation as, oh, we attempted to get 4, but it wasn't the 4 that would actually give that item. I mean, that's also an issue that could come across by that way as well.
Correct. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, again, I guess hence, yeah, that's a very important point that I was trying to address too. Okay, Senator Brown, if you have any questions or comments. You're still unmuted.
I guess a number of our colleagues must have left the hearing earlier if you're on to me already. I don't have really much to add. I think we can, a lot of different points have been brought up with regards to this particular bill, but I think one thing that does tie it all together is an underlying concern with regards to how GovGuam is going about their procurement and wanting to ensure that it's being done properly, it's being done fairly, and that, only select vendors are not being given an unfair, that they're being given an unfair advantage in being able to, essentially being able to get the public dollars. And that's the main concern. I think how we go about it, perhaps we need to do a little more review and coming to consensus, but there's a general distrust, at least certainly I feel that in the air with regards to how government procurement is being put in place. And particularly, Madam Chair, a few months ago, when we were looking at the situation of the sole source procurement that was going on, we do realize we're in a pandemic at this time, but at the same time, we also want to make sure that there's not abuse happening in the government. And we just discussed earlier on the other bill, how there are individuals out there in the community that are certainly trying to take advantage of every opportunity and not do it the right way. And I think that's the main concern, and wanting to ensure, if we could look at a small purchase at $5,000, $15,000, for most people, $5,000 is an awful lot of money. I don't know too many people walking around $5,000 in their back pocket. And it's just a general concern. And how do we address it? How do we address it properly so that there's some consistency And we can actually show, and I appreciate certainly the input from Mr. Hernandez as well, how do we show and ensure that, you know, these things went through the proper procurement process so that our money's being, and the public money more importantly, is being properly spent. It challenges you enough to go through procurement to begin with. But at the same time, we just want to make sure that the money is being properly spent. So hopefully we can come to some consensus on how to move forward with this bill so that we can have some comfort level. For me, that's always important. What is our level of comfort? So we can get past a lot of the concerns that we have in general with how procurement is happening on Guam. And those insiders in government are not misusing their positions to benefit friends or family. And I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, because certainly we've seen that happen time and time again. So with that, Madam Chair, I have no further comment with regards to this bill. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Right. Thank you, Senator Brown. So I do have a question, perhaps, you know, regards to the reporting. There seems to be a lack of reporting from agencies on the small purchases. Perhaps maybe they haven't exceeded the 15,000 in supplies in one procurement, but is there a concern in regards to cumulative small purchases? So, you know, that there was talk about serial small purchases, and that combination would then exceed the threshold. Do you see any value in having agencies report cumulative amounts of a specific vendor? This question is, I guess, for Director Byrne or anyone in the panel.
It's certainly, Senator, that's a way of looking at it. But of course, you know, it really depends, right? For, you know, if one agency is buying pencils, that may not amount to too much in the year. But if they're buying, you know, easels or some other kind of more expensive equipment from the same, or another agency from the same vendor, that would be a larger amount. So, you know, yes, I think as raw data, it's okay, but it's probably needs to be looked at and interpreted to be as useful as it might be.
Any other comments, responses? Okay, so Director Byrne, perhaps maybe a review by the Chief Procurement Officer or Procurement Officer of, I guess this all goes back to planned procurement. You know, reviewing the year's purchases and seeing what areas can actually be competitively bidded, which means it'll be publicized. I think that's one of the issues with small purchases. It's not necessarily publicized, right? And you know, being that we are in a budget, you know, we have budgets renewed every year, that I think that could be an opportune time to see, you know, what could be consolidated within an agency. Is that something that, as a manager of procurement, would that be something that could be implemented to have agencies when they submit their budgets to also review those purchases that have exceeded the small purchase threshold?
I think, Senator, that if as part of the budgetary process, you know, and DOE isn't responsible for the budget, but I think it could make itself responsible for this. As part of the budgetary process, information on procurement was required, or at least gathered. That certainly would work.
All right, thank you for that response. The other thing is, in the law currently, it talks about how those that have to provide reports, monthly reports, it limits it to Chief Procurement Officer, Director of Department of Public Works, and the head of a purchasing agency. So the definition of the head of a purchasing agency actually does not include, I believe, certain autonomous and semi-autonomous agencies. So that is why I put in the language procurement officer. I think it's important that whatever language that we put in, that you know, all the agencies should be reporting any kind of small purchases that exceed the, you know, the level that's listed in the law. So I guess this question is for Mr. Hernandez. Did you receive any response? I know there was a press release that was sent out in February of 2020 seeking agencies a response to their small purchase reporting. Did you receive any responses to that? And do you see any way in which we can improve that type of reporting?
For the small purchase, not that I am aware of. I will have to just check with my other colleagues, but the as far as like I'd have to go and check. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for those responses, and I appreciate everybody's. Oh yes, Senator Taitague.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the consideration. I just have one question with Mr. Burns. Do agencies or GSA have a registry or a list of authorized vendors with the history of providing small purchase items or services, allowing for agencies to engage in such procurement? Do they have a list that they already have available?
Sorry, I was on mute. I don't believe there's a list, but within the financial system, agencies know which vendors are authorized, and they can derive a list from that. As you know, we're engaged in trying to update the big procurement, the FMIS system, which hopefully will make information gathering less painful. But it is possible to derive that list from the existing information.
Okay, so there is some type of list, but yeah, the updated version. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Taitague.
Madam Chair, may I, you had a question about what a purchasing agency is. Am I cutting you off, Senator? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, I believe the definition sort of restricts it does restrict it to, I believe it doesn't include semi-autonomous agencies. So
it doesn't justify it based on whether they're autonomous or not, because some autonomous agencies have procurement authority and others don't. So it's based on whether you have express procurement authority. It's defined as purchasing agent means any governmental body other than the Chief Procurement Officer or the Director of Public Works, which is authorized by this chapter or its implementing regulations, or by way of a delegation from the Chief Procurement Officer to enter into contracts. So it's an agency that has authority to enter into a contract. Most line agencies don't, but I haven't gone through them all. I don't know what all their particular authorities are. But procurement is a specific act. And so a general authority to do any and all things necessary for, pursuit of your mission, that's overridden by a specific authority and the scheme of things with the courts and how they're interpreted. So this is a specific, and it would override the general authorities given to line agencies to perform their mission, for instance. So this is section Q in 5030, 5 GCA 5030. That's where all the definitions are.
yes, yeah, thank you for that. But I do recall the governmental body was actually changed to the definition of that. So it does not include certain agencies. So that's one of the contentions, I think. But we could
was the same way as a purchasing agency.
Yeah, it doesn't include certain. Yeah. Okay, so well, thank you for all your participation here today. I do appreciate Director Byrne, Attorney Brown, Jared Hernandez from the Public Auditor's Office, and all my colleagues and those that were here earlier for their questions, comments, and testimony. So Bill 236-36 is duly heard. We will now move to adjourn this committee. It is now 12:34 p.m. So do as Masi, everybody, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.